My dad told me to sleep in the garage because I was worth less than the dog, so I left with his biggest secret. I never thought I'd write any of this down. But here I am at 2 a.m. in La Quinta off the interstate in Texarkana, sitting on a bed that smells like industrial detergent, and my hands are still shaking. I'm going to try to put this in order. If it's messy, I'm sorry. I haven't slept in 3 days. I just want this off my chest before it eats me alive. My name is Ethan Crowley. I'm 26. I grew up in a small town called Ridgemont, Ohio. The kind of place where the only stoplight blinks yellow after 9 p.m. And everybody's great-grandparents are buried in the same cemetery. I lived there until I was 22, when I finally got out. I only came back 2 weeks ago because my mother called me crying. That's where this begins. The call came on a Tuesday. I was in Indianapolis, working a contract job installing HVAC units for a company called Pinnacle Mechanical. I'm a sheet metal worker by trade, nothing fancy, but I make a decent living and I keep to myself. My phone rang around lunchtime, and I almost didn't answer because the number was my dad's landline and I hadn't talked to him in over a year. When I heard my mother's voice instead, my stomach dropped. "Ethan, you need to come home," she said. Her voice was thin. Marlene, that's my mom, has always sounded thin, but this was different. This was the voice of someone who had been crying so much she was past the tears. He moved her in. "It's done. I can't do this anymore." I knew exactly what she meant. Her, Veronica, my father Dale's girlfriend, a woman I had only met twice, and both times she looked at me like I was a piece of furniture she wanted to move into storage. I sat down on a bucket in the parking lot of the shop and said, "Mom, are you safe right now?" "He's at work," she said. "He won't be back until 6. "But Ethan, please, come home." I told my foreman I had a family emergency and I drove the 4 hours north that afternoon. The whole drive I kept thinking about the last time I was in that house. The night my dad took my bedroom door off the hinges because I closed it while I was on a video call with my friend Tyler from basic training. That was 4 years ago. I thought things had mellowed. I thought maybe he had calmed down, or maybe my mother had finally found a way to keep the peace. I was wrong about basically everything. When I pulled into the driveway at 9 that night, the first thing I noticed was a new truck. A brand new Ford F-250 in bright cherry red, parked right in front of the house where my mother's Civic used to sit. The second thing I noticed was that the garage door was up and there was a mattress on the concrete floor. Just a bare mattress. No sheets, no frame, nothing. Just a twin mattress with a sleeping bag wounded up at one end and a pillow that looked like it had been pulled off somebody's couch. I stared at it for a long moment, then walked inside. My mother looked older. That's the only way to describe it. She had aged 10 years since Christmas. She was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea that had gone cold. And there was a Labrador retriever asleep on the couch in the living room. The dog, whose name is Biscuit because my mother has the personality of a sweet potato, lifted his head when I came in. He wagged his tail. I scratched his ears and he leaned into my hand. I love that dog. Got him as a puppy when I was 18. Paid for him myself with money I earned baling hay that summer. "He's sleeping in the garage," my mother said behind me, so quiet I almost missed it. "Who?" I said, already knowing. "You know who," she said. She didn't look at me. "He told me last week. He said since I was the one who wanted to keep the spare room as a guest room, then I could use it. He put Jake out there." Jake is my little brother. 16 years old. Plays left midfield on the Ridgemont High soccer team. Has a GPA that would embarrass most adults. And has spent the last 3 years sleeping in what used to be my old bedroom. He's the only reason my mother has stayed in that house as long as she has. Dale has never once raised a hand to Jake that I know of. And my mother has known that if she ever left she might lose custody because Dale would paint her as unstable, and she didn't have the money for a good lawyer back then. So she stayed. She stuck it out and she took it and she tried to give Jake the steadiest life she could. Now Dale had taken Jake's room and given it to Veronica, who has a daughter from a previous relationship. The girl, Haley, is 15. And Dale had decided without discussion that his girlfriend's daughter would have the big bedroom with the window that faces the backyard, because Haley needs her own space, Marlene. She's a teenage girl, you should understand. My mother told me this in the same flat voice she uses when she's past fighting about things. She told me Dale had bought Haley new bedding, a desk, a mirror with little LED bulbs around it. All in the span of a weekend. And Jake had helped carry the boxes in because Dale told him it would build character. He didn't even ask me, my mother said. He just did it. And when Jake tried to talk to him about it, Dale said, "You're 16. You don't need a room. You sleep anywhere." And that was it. I sat down across from her. I didn't know what to say. I said, "Where's Jake right now?" "Practicing," she said. "He has a game Friday. Practice runs until 8. I waited until he got home. He came in the back door around 8:15, his hair damp from the shower at the school. His backpack slung over one shoulder. He looked tired in a way teenagers shouldn't have to look. When he saw me, his face broke into this surprised, almost shy smile. The way he used to look when I came home from deployments, and I realized how much I missed him. I hugged him for a long time. He smelled like Irish Spring and cut grass and something underneath that I didn't want to think about, which was probably whatever the garage smelled like. We sat in the kitchen together. I told him I had come home because Mom called me, and I asked him how things were really going. He shrugged in the way only a 16-year-old can shrug. Like the whole world is a personal inconvenience, and he said, "It's fine." "Jake," I said, "don't do that, not with me." He looked down at the table. Then he said, "I sleep in the garage. It's fine. Biscuit sleeps with me most nights. He's warmer than the sleeping bag." I was quiet for a long time. Then I said, "Does he treat you okay otherwise?" "He doesn't really talk to me much," Jake said. "He talks to Haley a lot. He bought her a car last month. A used Civic, but still." My mother closed her eyes. I could tell she had known about the car and had been hoping nobody would mention it to Jake. Now it was out. Jake went on. "He tells Mom she doesn't know how to handle money. He tells her she's lucky he lets her stay in the house. He tells her if she wasn't such a cold fish in bed, maybe he'd want to be around her more." Jake said all this in the same flat, almost bored voice. And I realized then that he had been listening to this stuff for years. He had been marinating in it. He was used to it. That was the worst part. He was used to it. That night I slept in Jake's spot on the garage floor. Jake slept in the guest room with my mother. I wanted him to have at least one night under a roof, with a real bed and a door that locked. I put the sleeping bag around me and Biscuit crawled onto my legs and I lay there in the dark, listening to the refrigerator hum and thinking about the sequence of events that had led me to a concrete floor at 26 years old. The next morning Dale got home from his construction job around 6:30. I was in the kitchen making coffee for my mother. Dale walked in the back door and saw me and stopped dead. He's a big guy, my dad. 6'2", around 240 pounds. Used to work as a foreman for a concrete company before he fell off a ladder 2 years ago, and now he supervises from a truck. He has a handshake that could break your fingers and a laugh you can hear 3 houses away. And he has spent my entire life making sure I knew exactly how small I was. "Well, look who decided to show up," he said. He put his tool belt on the counter like a man laying down a weapon. "How long are you planning on being here?" "I haven't decided yet," I said. "Marlene asked me to come." "Marlene doesn't ask you to do anything," he said. "Marlene doesn't run this family. I do. If you're going to be here, you're going to pull your weight. I don't keep freeloaders under my roof." The way he said "under my roof," as if it were just his. As if my mother hadn't slept under that roof for 28 years. As if there wasn't a mortgage in both their names. I just nodded and poured myself a cup of coffee and let it go. I wasn't here to fight with him. I was here to figure out a plan for Jake and for Mom. The days that followed were a kind of slow torture I hadn't anticipated. Dale ran the house like a petty tyrant. He told my mother what to cook. He told Jake when to take a shower. He told Veronica's daughter Haley she could have the Wi-Fi password and she could stream whatever she wanted, but Jake got 45 minutes a day and only on the desktop in the corner of the living room. Veronica herself was almost never around. She worked as a receptionist at a dental office in the next town over and she came and went like she owned the place, which Dale made sure she understood she did. She called him Dale baby in front of my mother. She sat on his lap at dinner. She wore his t-shirts to bed. My mother ate her dinner at the kitchen counter while the rest of them took the dining table. I kept my head down and I watched. I watched my father come home each evening and ask Veronica what she wanted for dinner before he even asked anyone else how their day was. I watched him compliment Haley's appearance while Jake sat there in a hooded sweatshirt with a hole in the elbow. I watched him tell my mother, in front of me, that she should be grateful he hadn't kicked her out yet because nobody else would want her. I watched my mother's face stay perfectly still through all of it. I watched Jake eat his food and clear his plate and say thank you and retreat to the garage with Biscuit trotting after him. I watched all of it and I knew I had to do something, but I had no idea what. On the 4th night I asked Dale if Jake could use the spare bedroom at least until we figured out a more permanent solution. I said it carefully, neutral as I could. I was standing in the kitchen. Dale was sitting at the table with a beer, scrolling his phone. He didn't even look up. "He's fine where he is," Dale said. He's sleeping on concrete, Dad. He has school. He has soccer. He has a game Friday. He's a kid. He's got a roof over his head and a bed and a dog that keeps him warm, Dale said. He looked up then and his eyes were flat. He doesn't need a room. He needs to learn what it's like to earn one. When I was his age I was working in the fields 14 hours a day and sleeping in a barn that leaked. You kids don't know what hard is. Dad, I said, I did basic training at 18. I slept in a barracks with 40 other guys. I know what hard is. Jake is your son. Dale took a long drink of his beer. Then he said, you're not gonna gaslight me in my own house, Ethan. You can take your little speech and you can shove it. Jake sleeps where I say he sleeps. He eats what I cook. He lives how I let him. If you don't like it, the door's right there. There are garages all over this town that need renters. I didn't answer him. I went out to the garage and sat with Jake and Biscuit and I told him none of it. I didn't want him to know I had tried. He had enough to worry about. The next morning my mother called me into her bedroom. She had been crying again. She closed the door behind me and she said, very quietly, he hit me last night. I felt something cold move through my chest. I said, what do you mean, hit you? Open-handed, she said. Across the face. Because I asked him why the electric bill was $240 last month and he said, it was Veronica's business, not mine. Mom, we have to call the police. No, she said, if you call the police he will take Jake. You know he will. He will say I'm crazy. He will say I've been hysterical about Veronica. He will hire his cousin Brent and Brent will go to court and I will lose Jake. I cannot lose Jake. Brent Crowley is my father's younger brother. He is a family court attorney in Columbus. He has handled Dale's paperwork for the divorce threat he perpetually holds over my mother's head. Brent is also a man who has never met a side he didn't bill for. He would absolutely help Dale paint my mother as unfit. Especially with Jake now 16 and close to the age where a judge considers the child's preference. I sat on the edge of her bed and I put my face in my hands. I tried to think. I tried to think like a person who had some training in solving problems. But all my training was in ductwork and refrigerant lines. I didn't know how to fix a family that had been broken this badly for this long. I just knew I had to try. That afternoon, while Dale was at work, I started looking through papers in the house. I was looking for anything that might give my mother leverage. Insurance policies, the deed to the house, the mortgage statements, anything that would let her know what she actually had if she ever decided to leave. I started in the filing cabinet in the spare bedroom closet. Then I moved to the desk in the master bedroom. Then I went out to the garage because I knew Dale kept a lockbox in there for what he called important papers. The lockbox was a Sentry safe, the kind with the combination dial. I didn't know the combination. I was standing there in the garage looking at it, and Biscuit was sitting next to me like he was supervising. And Jake walked in from practice and saw me. He said, "What are you doing?" I told him I was trying to find the combination to the lockbox because Mom might need whatever was inside. Jake looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, "I know the combination." "How do you know the combination?" "Because he made me memorize it when I was 12, Jake said. He said if anything ever happened to him I was supposed to know where everything was. It was some kind of lesson about being prepared. The combination is my birthday backwards. 7401. I stared at him. Then I said, "Your birthday backwards." "Yeah," Jake said. He said it like this was normal. Like every father in the world made his child memorize the combination to a safe in case something happened to him. Jake turned the dial. 7401. The safe popped open. Inside there were two things. The first was a small canvas bag that clinked when I lifted it. I opened the bag and looked inside and there was a substantial amount of cash. I'd say roughly $8,000 in $100 bills. The second thing was a manila folder. I opened the folder and there were papers inside. Real estate documents, title transfers, mortgage statements on a property I had never heard of. Let me tell you what I found. I want to be specific because this is the part of the story I still can't quite believe. Even sitting here at this La Quinta writing it down. Dale Crowley, my father, has been living a double life for the better part of 15 years. He owns a rental house on Birchwood Drive in a town called Willowbrook, about 45 minutes east of Ridgemont. He bought it in 2009 for cash, according to the purchase agreement. And he has been collecting rent on it ever since, never declaring the income. Because the deed is in the name of a holding company called Lakeside Property Group LLC. And the LLC is registered to my father's cousin Brent in Columbus as the statutory agent. But the operating agreement, which was in the folder, lists Dale as the sole member. Dale has been hiding rental income from my mother for over a decade and a half. He has also been hiding it from the IRS. He has also, according to one of the older statements in the folder, been paying monthly mortgage payments on a second property, a small piece of land outside a town called Marsing, Idaho, where there is a single wide trailer that he bought in 2011 and never told anyone about. I sat on the garage floor looking at these papers with Biscuit's head in my lap and Jake standing next to me like a soldier awaiting orders, and the whole shape of my father rearranged itself in my mind. This was not a man who was broke. This was not a man who needed my mother to stretch her grocery money to the end of the month. This was not a man who told me, when I was 18 and trying to figure out how to pay for the first semester of trade school, that there was no money for it and I'd better think about enlisting. This was a man who had been telling me, for my entire adult life, that the family had nothing, while sitting on at least 3 properties and a rolling pile of unreported cash. I called my friend Tyler Briggs, who is a paralegal in Lexington, Kentucky, and I told him what I'd found. Tyler is the kind of friend who reads legal documents for fun. He said, "Take pictures of everything. Send them to me. Do not let anyone know you have them." I took pictures. I put the papers back exactly how I'd found them. I closed the lockbox and spun the dial. Jake and I went back into the house. I told my mother I had a plan, but I didn't tell her the plan yet. The plan took shape that night. Here's what we were going to do. My mother was going to quietly gather her important documents, her social security card, her passport, her medical records, her copies of the marriage certificate, her bank statements. Jake was going to pack a single bag of clothes and his soccer cleats and his school books. I was going to load all of it into my truck that Saturday morning while Dale was at the Little League game where he was coaching Haley's younger brother's team. I had told Dale earlier in the week that I was leaving on Saturday to go back to Indianapolis. He didn't object. He said, "Good, we need the driveway cleared for Veronica's sister to visit." We were going to take my mother and Jake out of that house, drive them to a women's shelter in Dayton where I had already called and made arrangements under a pseudonym, and we were going to file from a place of safety. The thing I agonized over was the cash and the documents in the lockbox. I went back and forth in my mind. I knew if I took them Dale would know immediately, because he checked the lockbox weekly, and there would be a manhunt. I knew if I copied them and put them back Dale might never know. But the copies would not have the same power. I knew if I told my mother and we confronted Dale with them, his first move would be to call Brent. And Brent would advise him on how to spin it, on how to make my mother look crazy, on how to paint Jake as a confused kid who had been turned against his father. In the end, I did something I am not proud of and something I am not ashamed of. I took the cash. I took the original documents. I left a single photocopy of each in the lockbox, along with a hand-drawn map of where I had taken my mother and Jake and a phone number for the Dayton shelter, because I wanted Dale to have a way to find them if he ever grew a conscience. I don't believe you will. I did it anyway. The cash was for my mother's first 3 months in a safe apartment. The documents were evidence. Evidence that Dale had defrauded his wife. Evidence that Dale had defrauded the United States government. Evidence that Dale had been lying about his finances for the entire duration of their marriage, which meant the entire financial settlement they had discussed, the one where my mother was supposed to walk away with nothing because she had nothing coming, had been negotiated in bad faith. I am aware that what I did could be characterized in several different ways depending on who you ask. I am aware there are people who will read this and say I stole from my own father. I am aware there are people who will say I rescued my mother from a violent man. I am aware both of those things can be true at the same time. I have made my peace with it. I am sitting in La Quinta in Texarkana because I did not take the documents straight back to Ohio. I am taking them to a lawyer Tyler recommended in Little Rock, a family law and estate attorney named Sandra Pham, who has agreed to see me on Monday morning and who has been briefed by Tyler on the general shape of what we have. After we hand over the originals and Sandra makes her copies and begins the process of filing for my mother's protection and for Jake's emancipation petition, I will go back to Indianapolis. I will keep working. I will send money to my mother when she is settled somewhere that is not under Dale Crowley's roof. I will talk to Jake on the phone every night. I will do these things until Jake turns 18 and can make his own decisions about whether he ever wants to see his father again. I want to tell you the moment I knew the plan was going to work. It was the morning of the Saturday we were leaving. I had been up since 4. I had loaded my mother's 3 boxes of documents and her 1 suitcase into the backseat of my truck, covered with a moving blanket so it looked like I was hauling work supplies. I had put Jake's bag in the cab. I had put Biscuit's dog bed and his kibble and his leash in the bed of the truck, because there was no way we were leaving that dog behind. I had taken the cash and the documents and put them in a locked metal box I'd bought at Tractor supply, and I had put the metal box in the very back of the truck under the tonneau cover. And I had put a load of gravel bags on top of it because gravel bags are heavy and nobody steals. Gravel bags. I was sitting at the kitchen table drinking coffee when my mother came in. She was wearing a clean blouse I had bought her at Goodwill the week before. She had her hair fixed. She looked, for the first time in the 2 weeks I had been home, like Marlene again. Like the woman who used to take Jake and me to the library every Saturday when I was a kid. The woman who used to bake banana bread on Sundays and whose kitchen always smelled like cinnamon. And something warm. She looked at me and she said, "Are we sure?" I said, "Are you sure?" She said, "I've been sure for 20 years. I just didn't know how." I said, "We know now." She nodded. She picked up her purse. We waited. We waited for the sound of Dale's truck rumbling up the driveway at 6:45. Like it did every Saturday morning, so he could grab a clean shirt and head to the ball fields. We heard it. We heard the engine cut off. We heard the driver's door. We heard Jake, who was supposed to be doing one last sweep of his room for anything important, come down the hallway. He came into the kitchen and looked at my mother and he looked at me and I saw his hand shake once. And then steady. We had a plan. We were not going to wait. We were not going to have a conversation. We were going to walk out while Dale was inside changing his shirt. Dale came into the kitchen from the garage. He was wearing his work boots and his team cap. He stopped when he saw Jake in his jacket and my mother with her purse and me standing there in my coat. He looked at me and his face went through several stages of something I can only describe as a man realizing he had underestimated what was happening in his own house. He said, "What is this?" I said, "We're going out for breakfast, Dad. At 6:45 in the morning? Biscuit needs the vet," I said. "There's a place in Dayton that opens early. We won't be back until after lunch." He didn't believe me. I could see it in his eyes. He didn't believe a word of it. But he also didn't want to make a scene. Because Veronica was still in the house and her sister's family was coming up that afternoon and he had plans to coach the game. He looked at my mother and he said, "Marlene, get me my orange shirt. The one without the bleach stain." My mother did not move. She stood there with her purse in her hands and Biscuit's leash looped around her wrist and she said, in a voice I had never heard her use in 28 years of marriage, "Get it yourself." "Dale." There was a silence so complete I could hear the refrigerator. Dale stared at her. Then he said, very quietly, "Excuse me?" "You heard me," she said. Her voice did not waver. Her hand did not shake. Jake was looking at the floor but his jaw was set. I was standing between them and the door. Dale looked at me, and for one long moment I thought he was going to come across the kitchen and hit one of us. I could see it in his shoulders. I could see it in the way his hand curled at his side. But then he thought better of it. He thought about the optics. He thought about Brent. He thought about the fact that, for the first time in his life, 3 of us were standing in a row and all of us meant it. He turned around and went back down the hallway to the bedroom to get his own shirt. My mother opened the back door. We walked out. We got in my truck. I backed out of the driveway. As we pulled past the front of the house I could see Dale standing in the doorway of the master bedroom, holding his orange shirt, watching us leave. He did not wave. He did not call after us. He just stood there, big and solid and small all at once. And the morning was cold and the sun had not come up yet and we drove away. We stopped at the gas station on the edge of town and bought my mother a coffee and Jake a hot chocolate and me the largest cup of black coffee they had. We put Biscuit on the leash to walk him around the parking lot. We stretched. We breathed. My mother put her hand on the back of my neck and she said, very gently, "You know he's going to come for you." "I know," I said. "He's going to tell everyone you stole from him. He's going to tell Brent to call the prosecutor. He's going to call your uncles. He's going to call your grandmother in West Virginia." "I know," I said again. "Are you ready for that?" I looked at her. I looked at Jake. I looked at Biscuit, who was sitting at my feet with his tail on the asphalt and his tongue hanging out and his eyes looking up at me like I had done a very good thing and he would like a treat now. "Please," I said. "I have 15 years of receipts of his fraud and a paralegal in Kentucky and a lawyer in Arkansas who's going to take this case on contingency because the recovery opportunity is in the 7 figures once they audit the LLC. I am as ready as I'm going to be." My mother laughed. It was the first time she had laughed in 2 weeks. She laughed until she cried and then she cried until she laughed and Jake sat in the truck drinking his hot chocolate and watching the sun come up over a gas station in Ridgemont, Ohio. We made it to Dayton in 2 hours. The shelter took them in the way shelters do, quickly and without much ceremony. Because they had been expecting us. I gave them the cash, all of it, every $100 bill. And I watched the intake coordinator count it with a straight face because she had probably seen Worse and better, they gave my mother a key to a small room with 2 cots and a window that faced a parking lot. They put Jake in the teen dorm, which he was anxious about but told me was fine. They had a fenced area in back where Biscuit could be walked. I sat with my mother for an hour and I told her what she needed to know about the documents and what was going to happen over the next few weeks. I told her to expect a call from Sandra. I told her to expect a call from Tyler. I told her not to answer any calls from Dale or from Brent or from Dale's mother, who is a woman named Dorothy Crowley in Wheeling, West Virginia, who has spent my entire life pretending not to know what her son is. I hugged my mother goodbye. I told her I loved her. I told her to take care of herself, because I was going to take care of the rest. I left Dayton and I drove south. I am now in Texarkana. I'm not going to Ohio until Tuesday. I have 2 days to rest before I see Sandra and I want to be sharp when I walk in. I have a folder with copies of the documents. I have the originals in the metal box under the gravel bags in the bed of my truck. I have Biscuit, who is asleep on the floor of the La Quinta room and who has been an absolute champ. About this entire adventure, I have been thinking about what to do with the cash. I know what I did was technically theft. I know Dale can file a police report and make a case. I know there are arguments both ways. I am not asking anyone to tell me whether what I did was right or wrong. I am telling you what happened. I am telling you because I am tired of carrying it alone. I am telling you because my mother is in a shelter tonight and my little brother is sleeping on a cot about 30 feet away from her and the dog is on the floor between them and none of them is going to wake up to a man's voice telling them they are worth less than the dog they are sleeping next to. I am telling you because this morning I ate breakfast at a diner in Vincennes, Indiana, with my little brother, and when I asked him how things were he said, "I don't have to sleep in the garage anymore, Ethan." That was enough. That was the entire thing. That was the whole point. I have a lot more to do. I have to go to Little Rock on Monday. I have to call Sandra and walk her through what we have. I have to make sure Sandra understands that my mother does not want punitive damages against Dale. She wants Jake out and she wants her name off the mortgage on the house in Ridgemont. I have to tell Jake he cannot talk to his father on the phone, no matter how many times Dale calls. No matter how many times Dale says he's sorry, no matter what Dale says about how he's changed. Because Dale has said he was sorry before and Dale has always meant it for about 6 hours. I have to call my own therapist, who is a woman named Drive Paula Renteria in Indianapolis, and put in for a session on Wednesday because I have not processed 1/10 of this yet and I am starting to feel the kind of numb that means I am about to break if I don't let myself feel some of it. I am going to be okay. My mother is going to be okay. Jake is going to be okay. Dale is going to be angry and he is going to try to hurt me and he is going to tell the family that I came home and robbed him and he is going to be believed by some of them because Dale has spent my entire life making sure the family believed whatever version of events served him best. That is going to be hard. I am going to take it. I am going to let Sandra and Tyler handle most of it. I am going to go back to work on Wednesday and I am going to install ductwork and I am going to drink my coffee out of a thermos at 7 in the morning and I am going to listen to audiobooks on the drive home and I am going to call my mother every night at 9 and I am going to talk to Jake until he falls asleep and I am going to do these things because they are the things I can do. They are the small things. They are the only things. The big thing, the secret, the bag of cash and the folder of documents. That is going to do its own work. That is going to land in Sandra's hands and it is going to make its way through the courts. It is going to bring up questions Dale has not been asked in 15 years. It is going to be uncomfortable. It is going to be loud. Dale is going to yell and threaten and charm and cry. Brent is going to bill him for the privilege. Dorothy is going to call me a thief and a liar and say I broke her son's heart. My uncle Kevin Crowley, who lives in Cincinnati and has never once intervened in anything but who suddenly has opinions when it is safe to have them, is going to weigh in. The whole machinery of Dale's personality, which has been grinding my family down for decades, is going to have to look at itself for once. I want to write it down here because I want to remember it. I want to remember that on a Saturday morning in October, my mother picked up her purse and my little brother grabbed his bag and I opened the front door and we walked out of a house my father thought was his, and none of us looked back. I want to remember that Dale stood in the doorway of his bedroom holding a shirt and watched us leave and did not say a word. I want to remember that my mother's voice, when she told him to get his own shirt, did not waver. I want to remember that Jake's hand shook once before it steadied. I want to remember that Biscuit rode in the back seat of my truck and stuck his head out the window for the first 20 miles and then curled up on a moving blanket and slept the rest of the way. Because dogs know when they are safe and they relax when they are. I am going to turn my phone off now. I am going to take a shower. I am going to order a pizza from the place down the road because I haven't eaten real food in 2 days. I am going to sleep in a bed for the first time in a week. Tomorrow I am going to drive to Little Rock and I am going to park my truck in the lot of a law office on Kavanaugh Boulevard, and I am going to walk in and I am going to hand a woman named Sandra a metal box that contains my father's secrets, and I am going to trust her to do something good with them. I am not sure how to feel about any of it yet. I am not sure if I will feel good about any of it in a year. I am sure that my mother is not sleeping on the garage floor tonight. I am sure that Jake is not sleeping on the garage floor tonight. I am sure that Biscuit is not sleeping on the garage floor tonight. I am sure that I did what I thought was right, and I am willing to live with whatever comes from it. That's all I have. That's the whole story. Thank you for reading it. Story 2. My wife mocked my minimum wage job at dinner, then her company hired me as her new boss. I still remember the exact moment I realized I had become a stranger in my own marriage. It wasn't when Davina started coming home late 3 nights in a row with the excuse of a campaign deadline. It wasn't even when she began rolling her eyes every time I wiped flour on my jeans at breakfast. The real moment was at a quiet Italian restaurant on a Tuesday evening in late September, when my mother-in-law, Blythe, smiled at me across a basket of breadsticks and called me the little shelf boy in front of 6 people, and my wife laughed first and loudest. I'm Ezra Colburn, 34, born and raised in a small duplex outside Toledo, Ohio that my mother, Marisol, still lives in. I never went to college. I worked full-time at a packaging plant from age 19. Took night classes for 2 years at a community college. Dropped out when tuition jumped and the plant offered me a supervisor shift. And then watched the plant close in 2019. After that I picked up jobs where I could. For the last 2 years I have been a third shift stocker at a regional grocery chain called Henninger's. It is honest work. I unload trucks. I rotate stock. I climb ladders in a frozen aisle at 2 in the morning with a hoodie pulled over my ears. And at the end of the week I bring home a check for roughly $620 after taxes. I am not embarrassed by that. I never have been. The way I was raised. You do not look down on the people who keep the lights on and the shelves full. Davina Colburn, née Harkavy, is the daughter of a retired orthodontist, Wendell, and a part-time real estate broker, Blythe. They live in a cul-de-sac in Carmel, Indiana, in a house with a 3-car garage and a sprinkler system that turns on at 6 in the morning. Whether anyone asked it to or not, Davina went to Butler, got a marketing degree in 4 years, and works now as a brand coordinator for a mid-sized logistics company called Vassar and Greer. She makes a comfortable salary. She drives a leased CX-5. She has a Roth IRA, a matching 401k, a fitness membership she almost never uses, and a Nordstrom card she uses far too often. When we started dating in 2020 I was working at the packaging plant and she told me, with what I now realize was a glassy-eyed sincerity, that she didn't care what I did for a living as long as I was good and decent. I believed her. For 3 years I believed her. We got married in a courthouse in 2022. We had a small party afterward at a rooftop bar in Indianapolis with maybe 40 guests, half of whom I had never met and who kept asking me what I did and receiving the answer with the type of pause that tells you a person has already quietly categorized you. I learned to fill that pause. I learned to say, supply chain, on the warehouse side, with a small, easy smile. It made the pause shorter. It made Davina's family nod politely. Her father, Wendell, called me a worker, the way a senator calls a senator, my colleague from the other side of the aisle, which is to say with the tone of a man who has decided you are not his tribe but will be civil about it. The dinner that broke something in me happened because Blythe and Wendell were in town for a long weekend and Davina wanted to do something nice for them. I use the quotation marks because she said the word nice the way other people say extraction, as though the goal was to remove us both from ordinary life for a couple of hours and present a more polished version of our marriage to her parents. She picked the restaurant, a place called Carmela's on Main that serves capellini with lump crab and charges $32 for a chicken dish. I wore my one good shirt. She wore a wrap dress she had bought specifically for the occasion. I figured if anyone was trying that night, it was both of us. The table was round. To my left sat Wendell, who was already on his second glass of a Sancerre he had ordered without looking at the list. To my right sat Blythe, who was wearing a silk blouse the color of a peach and a smile the color of a peach and applying both with equal focus. Across from me was Davina, and on either side of Davina were her two closest friends from college, Mallory Greer and Sloane Whitaker, who had come to town for the weekend and who had been folded into the dinner because, as Davina explained on the drive over, it would be rude to leave them out. I didn't mind. I had met Mallory and Sloane before. Mallory is sharp and quiet in the way accountants sometimes are, and Sloane runs social media for a brewery and has the kind of effortless banter I have always been slightly jealous of. I figured the more voices at the table, the less chance of any one of them zeroing in on me, because that is the kind of mental math a person in my position learns to run. The first 20 minutes were pleasant. Wendell talked about his garden. Mallory asked Davina about a campaign she had been running for a downtown co-working space. Sloane made a joke about a client at the brewery who had tried to order a dry hop Negroni, and the bartender had stared at him. Blythe asked me how work was going, and I answered the truth, that it was steady, and she said, "Well, steady is good, Ezra. A lot of people don't even have that right now," and I said thank you. And the table moved on. The second 20 minutes are where the evening began to curdle. It started, like most things with the Harkavies, with a story. Blythe told the table about a friend of hers from her book club whose daughter had married down to a young man who worked at a hardware store, and how the daughter had to carry the whole household on her shoulders, and the husband couldn't even afford to take her to dinner. She laughed as she told the story. She apologized as she told the story. She said, "Of course, that's not our situation at all. Ezra, you're a hard worker." The way a person pats a dog that has just been told not to jump and then immediately pats the dog. Because it did. I smiled. Davina did not react. Mallory made a small face into her wine glass that I saw and she saw me see, and we both pretended we hadn't. Then Wendell asked a question that I have replayed in my head more times than I want to admit. He leaned forward, folded his napkin into a triangle, and said, "So Ezra, my boy, what is the long-term plan here? I mean, you and Davina are, what are we, 3 years in now? 4? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? Are we talking about moving up at the grocery store? Is there a path? Because Davina's mother and I, we worry. We're not trying to pry. We just worry." He said it with kindness in his voice. That was the worst part. He meant it kindly. He was being a father. He was worried about his daughter. And in the process he had laid me out on a plate in front of everyone like one of Carmela's $32 chickens. I told him the truth. I said I was looking into supervisor roles at Henninger's, that there was a new distribution center opening in the spring and a couple of internal postings that paid a few dollars more an hour. That I was also thinking about applying to some warehouse foreman jobs in the area. That I had been talking to a recruiter about a logistics position at a company called Vassar and Greer that was, as it happened, the same company Davina worked at. That the recruiter had told me I was a strong candidate because of my plant experience and my OSHA training, and that I was waiting on a callback. I said all of this in a calm voice. I did not apologize for myself. I am past apologizing for myself. Davina looked at me when I said the name Vassar and Greer. "What?" she said. "The recruiter reached out last week," I told her. "I was going to tell you tonight, actually. You were going to tell me tonight. At dinner. In front of my parents." Her voice was not loud. It was the exact opposite of loud. It was the voice a person uses when they want you to know that they are choosing, with great effort, not to embarrass you. "I didn't think it was a big deal," I said. "Vassar and Greer is my company, Ezra. I know that. You applied to my company without telling me. They reached out to me. I didn't seek it out." Blythe set her fork down. Wendell stopped folding his napkin. Mallory looked at her plate. Sloane, who had been mid-drink, very slowly set her glass down with the kind of care a person reserves for an unstable grenade. And then Blythe did what Blythe always does at the exact moment my marriage needs a tourniquet. She laughed. "Oh, Davina," she said. "Don't be cross with him. He's just trying. You know what, Ezra, I bet you'd be great shelving things for them too. You already have experience. Maybe they could put you in Davina's department. Wouldn't that be sweet? You could go in together in the morning. Carpool, like a little married team." She turned to Mallory and Sloane. "Isn't that cute? Imagine, the two of them, in the same building. He could bring her coffee from the kitchen. Or she could bring him coffee. I forget who's bringing coffee to whom." She laughed. Wendell chuckled into his wine. Davina looked down at her plate with the tiniest twitch at the corner of her mouth. She was trying very hard not to laugh. She was trying very hard to do the right thing and not laugh at her mother for laughing at her husband, and she failed. A small, polite, half-suppressed laugh escaped. Then a bigger one. Then she covered her mouth with her hand and said, "Mom, stop," but she was still laughing. She was laughing the way you laugh when a joke is funny and you want it to be funny and you don't want to be the person who isn't laughing at the joke. I sat there. I felt the heat climb up my neck and into my ears. I felt Mallory not looking at me. I felt Sloane looking at me out of the corner of her eye and then looking away quickly. I felt Wendell reach across the table and pat my hand with the back of his palm the way a man pats a grandchild, and I felt my stomach drop into the bottom of my chair. Ezra, we're just teasing, Wendell said. You know that. We're family. Family teases. But they weren't teasing. They were measuring. They were laying a tape from my side of the table to Davina's side of the table and announcing the difference out loud, and they were doing it with the protective instinct of two people who believe their daughter settled, and they were doing it in front of our friends, and my wife had joined them, and I was sitting at the round table at Carmela's with a half-eaten piece of bread and a feeling in my chest I had not felt since I was a teenager and my father walked out of our duplex without saying goodbye. I went to the bathroom. I stood in front of the mirror. I washed my hands. I looked at myself. I made the decision, right there in that little single-occupancy bathroom with a candle on the sink and a basket full of lavender sachets, that I was not going to let this marriage fold me in half like a piece of mail. I came back to the table. I sat down. Davina asked me if I was okay. I said yes. Blythe asked me if I wanted more bread. I said no. Sloane changed the subject to a friend of theirs who had just gotten engaged in Lake Tahoe. Wendell told a story about a client of his who had bought a lake house. The evening limped to its end. I drove us home. Davina thanked me for being a good sport, and I said you are welcome, and I closed my eyes for a long time in the dark of the passenger seat of my own apartment because Davina had been the one to drive that night. When we got inside, I told her I was serious about the job at Vassar and Greer. I told her the recruiter, a woman named Carissa Pemberton, had sent me the job description for an opening called Warehouse Operations Supervisor on the second shift team that serviced the company's regional distribution hub, and that I had applied. And that I had a phone screen scheduled for Thursday. Ezra, she said, sitting down on the edge of the bed with her shoes still on. Be realistic. They have an internal pipeline. They have a leadership program. They're not going to hire someone off the street to run a warehouse shift. Some people off the street have supervisory experience, I said. I know that, she said quickly. I'm not saying you don't. I'm saying that Vassar and Greer is a real company. They have standards. They have codes of conduct. They have a culture. You can't just what? Nothing. Say it. I just don't want you to be embarrassed if they say no. Why would I be embarrassed? Because it's my company, Ezra, and if you apply there and they say no, I'm the one who's going to have to walk around that office knowing my husband got turned down by my own HR department. Davina, I'm trying to protect you. You're trying to protect yourself from being embarrassed. That's not the same thing. She stood up. She took her shoes off. She went into the bathroom. She closed the door. I sat on the edge of the bed and I looked at my phone. I had an email from Carissa Pemberton. The subject line read, Vassar and Greer, Warehouse Ops Supervisor, Next Steps. I opened it. It said I had passed the phone screen and they wanted to invite me to an in-person panel interview at the regional hub on the following Wednesday. I put the phone down. I went to the kitchen. I poured myself a glass of water. I drank it slowly and I thought about my mother, Marisol, who had raised me and my brother Joaquin, well, technically my brother-in-law. But he had become my brother in every way that mattered, on a used car salesman's salary after our father left. Marisol used to say, in Spanish, when she wanted me to be brave, no te achiques. It means, roughly, don't make yourself small. She said it to me the night I dropped out of community college. She said it to me the day I lost the plant job. She said it to me, I am sure of this even though she wasn't in the room. On the night of the dinner at Carmela's, I told Joaquin about the dinner before I told anyone else. Joaquin Reyes is 41. He works at a body shop in Speedway, Indiana, doing paint and finish work on classic cars. He is the calmest human being I have ever met. He listens like a priest. He doesn't give you advice unless you ask for it. And even then he gives you only as much as he thinks you can carry. When I told him what had happened at Carmela's, he sat in his kitchen for a long time and then he said, "Did you laugh?" I told him I didn't. He said, "Good, don't start." I told him about the Vassar and Greer interview. He said, "Are you any good at the job they're hiring you to do?" I told him I was. He said, "Then go get it. If they don't hire you, you didn't lose anything. If they do, you won something your wife can't take back." I sat at his kitchen table and drank a beer and I felt my shoulders drop an inch for the first time in weeks. The interview was on a Wednesday morning. I drove to the regional hub in Plainfield in my one dress shirt and a pair of slacks I had bought At JCPenney the week before. The building was the kind of long, low, beige warehouse you see from the interstate and don't think about. Inside it smelled like cardboard and forklift batteries and the faint sweetness of pallet wrap. The panel was 3 people. Carissa Pemberton from HR. A man named Garrison Quintero who was the director of operations for the second shift. And a woman named Percy Ye who was the outgoing supervisor of the shift I was interviewing for. Who was leaving after 9 years to take a role at the company's flagship hub in Columbus. Percy was direct and warm in the way that very experienced warehouse people are direct and warm. She asked me about OSHA. She asked me about load sequencing. She asked me about a time I had disciplined a worker for coming in impaired and how I had handled it. I told her the truth about each. I could see Garrison writing things down with a small pleased look on his face. The look a person has when a candidate says the things they had been hoping a candidate would say. At the end, Carissa leaned forward and asked me, "We have a question we ask every candidate now. Ezra, we've refined it this year. It's about how you'd manage a peer who was senior to you in a different way but junior to you in the role. Specifically, what would you do if someone on your shift was technically reporting to you operationally but had, for example, been at the company for a long time and had a lot of internal relationships, and was maybe the spouse of someone in another part of the business, and was using those relationships to push back on your decisions? How would you handle that?" I told her the truth. I told her I would treat that person the way I would treat anyone on the shift. Fairly and consistently. And I would document any pushback that crossed the line into insubordination. And I would invite Carissa into any conversation that needed to go above my pay grade. Carissa wrote that down too. She looked at me when she finished writing and she said, "That's exactly the answer we were hoping to hear." I did not know why. I would find out later. I got the offer 2 days later. It was for $63,000 a year, plus benefits. Plus a small quarterly bonus tied to shift safety metrics. It was almost triple what I was making at Henninger's. It was more than I had ever made as a single year of income in my life. I sat in my car in the Henninger's parking lot on my lunch break and I read the offer letter 3 times. Then I called my mother. She didn't say anything for 15 seconds. Then she said, in Spanish, "Ay, mijo." And then she cried. And then she said, "Your brother Joaquin is going to lose his mind." And I said, "I'm going to lose mine." The next part of the story is the part 1 didn't plan. Davina came home that night and I was sitting at the kitchen table with 2 printed copies of the offer letter and a celebratory beer I had bought at the gas station on the way home. I told her. She set her bag down. She didn't move for a few seconds. Then she walked over to the table. She picked up one of the copies. She read it. She set it down. "You're going to be a warehouse supervisor," she said. "Yes. At my company. At the same company. You're going to be a shift supervisor. You're going to be above, Ezra. The brand team reports up through operations for fulfillment coordination. Percy's shift was the one my team worked with on shipping the campaign samples. You're going to be that level. You're going to be on the org chart as the supervisor of the shift that your team's fulfillment liaisons coordinate with on a daily basis," I said, because I had read the org chart Percy had sent me with the interview materials. She stared at me. I watched a series of small movements cross her face. There was surprise, which I expected. There was the beginning of a smile, which I had hoped for. There was then a second wave of something else. Something I didn't recognize immediately but which I now know was the first faint tremor of fear. She sat down across from me. "Baby," she said, "I need you to be careful." "Of what?" "Of how people at the office read this. There are people on my team who have been there longer than I have. Sloan, my friend Sloan, works in marketing at a different company. But I have a coworker named Sloan, no relation, on my team who has been there since before me. There are people who have opinions about nepotism. There are people who will talk. I need us to be smart about how we announce this. I need us to be smart about how you behave when you start." "Okay," I said, "what do you suggest?" "I suggest we don't tell anyone we're married for the first month. I suggest you start, you do your job, you keep your head down, you don't talk to me at work. I suggest we keep our home life completely separate from your work life. I suggest we don't even drive in together. Why wouldn't we drive in together? We live in the same apartment. Because carpooling. Because someone will see us. Because the moment someone sees us getting out of the same car at the same time, the office is going to explode with gossip and I cannot survive that, Ezra, I really cannot." I looked at her. I felt the familiar feeling I had felt at Carmela's. The feeling of being measured, and I made a decision that I am not proud of but I do not regret. "We'll play it your way for now," I said. "But I'm not going to lie about being married to you if someone asks me directly." I'm not going to introduce myself as a single man. I'm not going to hide my life. I'm not asking you to lie. I'm asking you to use discretion. I'm going to use discretion. Thank you. You're welcome. Neither of us said anything else. She went to the bathroom. I drank my beer. The next day I called Carissa and accepted the offer. My start date was a Monday 4 weeks out. I quit Henninger's 2 days later. The manager there, a man named Trevelyan, shook my hand and told me I had been a good worker and he wished more of his people had my reliability, and I walked out into the parking lot and I sat in my car and I cried for the first time in 2 years. The first day was a quiet, careful blur. Percy had stayed on for a 2-week handover. She walked me through the layout of the hub, the names of the 5 team leads reporting to me, the cadence of the shift huddles, the way the inventory system logged everything that went in and out of the bay doors, the small politics of which team leads had been at the company for 15 years and which had been there for 2, which ones had lost family members in the last year and which ones were dealing with custody battles, the ones to be a little gentler with and the ones to push a little harder. Percy was leaving for Columbus in 10 days. She wanted to leave her shift in good hands. I listened. I took notes. I carried a small notebook in my back pocket from then on and I wrote things down the way my mother used to write the grocery list on the back of an envelope. I learned the names of my team. There was Lamar Oxley, who had been at the company for 14 years and who knew every inch of the place like a grandfather knows his backyard. There was Ines Covarrubias, who was the only other person of color on the shift and who had become, in the first week, the person I leaned on when I wasn't sure how a particular subculture inside the warehouse wanted to be approached. There was Tobias Eklund, who was quiet and shockingly good with the inventory software and who had been overlooked for promotion twice. There was Rashida Knighton, who was a single mom working the swing shift because it let her pick up her daughter from school, and who ran the conditioning lane with a discipline I had rarely seen in my life. There was Matteo Falcone, who was 23 and eager and a little clumsy with authority but kind in a way that made his small mistakes forgivable. There was Garrison Quintero, who I had met on the interview panel, who was technically my boss but who had quietly told me on day 2 that he considered the shift mine to run and that he would only step in if I asked him to. Percy had given me a good team. Percy had earned her promotion to Columbus. The first 10 days were some of the best days of my working life. I did not see Davina at work for the first 2 weeks. Her floor was on the opposite end of the building, and the brand team's fulfillment liaison, a woman named Hadley Stroud, communicated with my shift through the company messaging system. Things were calm, things were quiet, things were the way Davina had wanted them. In the 3rd week, on a Wednesday, I had a shift huddle at 6 in the morning and a small piece of operational information came down from Carissa in our, the brand team, which included Davina, was rolling out a new campaign for a client and the campaign required the production and shipping of a large run of physical samples. The samples had to go out by Friday at 4 in the afternoon to hit a downstream timeline, and the dispatch window for my shift was being adjusted slightly to accommodate. I sent a short note up through the proper channel. That was all I did. I didn't say anything to anyone about whose campaign it was. I didn't say anything to Davina. I didn't message her at home. We had a rule that we didn't talk about work after hours. On Thursday morning, I received a chat message from a brand coordinator I had never spoken to, a woman whose name I recognized from a signature line in an email but had never met. Her name was Sloane Whitaker. Wait, I should clarify. The Sloane Whitaker at Vassar and Greer was not the Sloane Whitaker who had been at the dinner. They have the same name. It is a coincidence so strange it sounds made up. The Sloane at Vassar and Greer was a 31-year-old from Muncie who had been at the company for 4 years on the brand team. The Sloane at the dinner was my wife's friend from Butler who ran social media at a brewery. 2 different people with the same name. The universe occasionally takes a small, cruel pleasure in this sort of echo. Sloane Whitaker at Vassar and Greer sent me a message at 7:14 a.m. on Thursday. It was 2 paragraphs long. It said, in essence, that she was the brand coordinator assigned to the campaign. That she understood from Hadley that my shift had moved the dispatch window on Friday to give the campaign samples priority outbound placement, and that she appreciated that very much, and that she was looking forward to a smooth Friday. The message was professional. It was warm. It was the kind of message a person sends when they want to be on good terms with the warehouse lead. I sent back a short reply. I thanked her for the note. I said the dispatch window was locked in for 4 p.m. and that I had asked Lamar Oxley, who ran outbound staging, to give the campaign samples a dedicated lane in the staging area so that there would be no mixing with other freight. I said if there was anything else the brand team needed, to please let me know through Hadley as the proper liaison channel. I was trying, very hard, to do this correctly. I was trying to do it so correctly that nobody had any reason to look twice at me. On Friday, everything went smoothly. Lamar staged the samples on lane 7. Dispatch went out at 4. Hadley sent me a thank you through the system. The shift wrapped up at 6. I drove home. I was in a good mood for the first time in a long time. Then, on Monday of the 4th week, Carissa called a brief shift lead sync. She told us a brand coordinator had filed a request through the proper channel that week asking that future campaign dispatches be given their own dedicated outbound lane whenever possible, and that this was being formalized into a new internal policy. Carissa said this was a good idea and that we were going to start implementing it. She said the request had come from Sloan Whitaker on the brand team. She didn't say that this hadn't been my idea. She didn't have to. The point, I realized, was that my wife, or, more precisely, my wife's coworker, with the same first name as my wife's friend from Butler who had been at Carmela's, had taken the small operational courtesy I had offered and turned it into an institutional change with her name on it. That is office politics. That is how it works. I understood. I had no feelings about it. I didn't, except that I did. I had feelings about it. I had feelings about it because when I got home that night, Davina was on the couch with her laptop and she said, without looking up, "Sloan on my team is so smart. She just got a new policy in place that the warehouse team is going to roll out for all of her campaigns. She's going to get a kudos in the next leadership review. She's really impressive." I said, "That's good." And she said, "I wish I had that kind of initiative." And I almost said it. I almost said, "You did. Your husband did that for her. I did that for her. I have been quietly setting aside a dedicated outbound lane for her for 2 weeks and she is now going to be rewarded for asking for the thing I already gave her." I almost said it. I did not say it. I went to the kitchen. I poured myself a glass of water. I sat down at the table. I thought about Marisol. I thought about Joaquin. I made the decision to keep my mouth shut. That was the first week. The second week is where things got harder. On Tuesday of the second week, Hadley came to me with a conflict. Davina's team had a campaign for a different client, and the samples for that campaign had been mistakenly routed to lane 7, which was now the dedicated lane for the campaign run Sloan was managing. The mistake had happened because Tobias Eklund, who ran inbound reconciliation, had been out sick and the temp filling in for him had defaulted the routing to the most recently used lane. It was a small, innocent mistake, but Davina's team was unhappy about it because, as far as they were concerned, lane 7 belonged to them now, and the samples for Davina's campaign had been delayed by about 40 minutes, which had put Davina behind on her own client deadline. I had to make a decision. Did I split the lane by client for the rest of the week? Or did I create a single shared lane for both campaign teams? I chose the first. I sent a brief written plan to Hadley and a copy to Carissa, so that the rule was now in writing and traceable. Carissa approved it within 10 minutes. I posted a short note about it on the shift's internal board. I thought it was over. It was not over. On Wednesday, Sloan Whitaker, the Sloan from Vassar and Greer, not the Sloan from Butler, messaged me again. This time the message was different. She asked, politely but firmly, whether the lane 7 policy she had requested was being amended to allow Davina's campaign samples to share the lane. I explained, in writing, that the previous case had been a routing glitch, that the policy remained intact, that lane 7 was still dedicated to her campaign, and that Davina's team's samples had been moved to lane 8. She thanked me and moved on. On Thursday, Davina came home from work and she was angry in a way I had not seen her be angry in a long time. She set her bag down on the kitchen table and she said, "Did you move my samples off lane 7? "Yes." "Why?" "Because lane 7 is a dedicated outbound lane for the campaign that Sloan has been working on. It was a routing glitch on Tuesday and I fixed it. Your team's samples are now on lane 8, which is also a dedicated lane. They have the same priority." "Ezra, I have been on this campaign for 2 months. I have been asking for prioritization for my own client, who is a much bigger account than hers. And you just gave Sloan a lane and gave me a lane that you also gave to someone else? I gave you your own lane. Lane 8 is yours. My client is bigger than Sloan's client. By revenue, by every metric. And you have given my client a lane that is shared? Your client has a dedicated lane. Sloan's client has a dedicated lane. Both lanes have the same priority. The lanes are functionally equivalent. That's not the point, Ezra. What is the point? The point is that my client should have been given the longer standing lane. Because I have been asking for priority longer than Sloane has been asking for priority. And instead you gave it to her. Davina, I made the call based on the operational request that came through the proper channel. Sloane filed a formal request last week. Your team did not file a formal request. I am not going to give priority based on seniority of requests. I am going to give priority based on operational clarity. You think you're smarter than me. I don't think I'm smarter than you. I think I'm the supervisor of the shift that your team depends on for outbound dispatch. And I'm trying to do the job the way Carissa and Garrison have asked me to do it. Garrison likes you. I don't know why. You've been there 5 weeks. Percy trained me for 2 weeks. Garrison has been supervising ops for 9 years. He likes me because Percy trained me well and because I'm doing the job she trained me to do. You are unbelievable. Thank you. We didn't speak for the rest of the night. I went to bed at 11. She came to bed at 1. In the morning we both pretended the argument had been about the dishwasher. At work on Friday, I noticed something. Daryl Manser, who was a senior freight liaison on the brand team and who had been at the company for 11 years, had stopped responding to my messages through the system. His replies used to come back within 15 minutes. Now they came back the next day. His tone had become formal and slightly clipped. He had begun CCing Carissa on routine exchanges that had never been escalated before. I didn't say anything. I asked Garrison about Daryl in our weekly one-on-one. Garrison looked at me with his small, knowing half smile and said, "Welcome to Shift Leadership Politics, Ezra. Let me know if it gets worse. If it gets worse, call Carissa." I made a note in my notebook. I kept going. The next week, on a Tuesday, Carissa called me into a small conference room with a glass wall that I disliked intensely because I felt like a fish in it. She told me that Davina, my wife, had filed a complaint through the internal system about me. The complaint, paraphrased, alleged that I had shown favoritism toward one brand coordinator by giving that coordinator a dedicated outbound lane and had, in the same breath, undermined another brand coordinator, my wife, by failing to grant her campaign the same level of prioritization, despite her longer tenured relationship with the company and her more senior account. Carissa explained the procedure. She said I was entitled to respond in writing. She said the complaint would be reviewed both by her and by Garrison and by an outside HR partner. She said the complaint included a request that I be reassigned to a different shift at a different hub. She said, very gently, that I should treat this as a serious allegation because, on its face, it alleged nepotism in reverse, alleged that I was either playing favorites or punishing my own spouse, and I needed to be able to demonstrate that neither was the case. She also said, and I will never forget this, Ezra, I want to be transparent with you. We know you're married. We knew when we hired you. We discussed it internally. Carissa and Percy and I had a conversation about it during the hiring process. We decided that your marital relationship was not a basis to disqualify you. Especially because your direct reports would not include your spouse and your operational decision-making authority was structurally separate from her team's. We also know that your spouse has filed this complaint. And we are going to investigate it on the merits, fairly. And we are going to protect your confidentiality and hers throughout the process. I want you to know that we are not going to allow this complaint to be used as a tool to push you out of a role you earned. And we are not going to allow it to be used as a tool to elevate your wife's standing either. I want you to know that. Now I am going to ask you to write a response. I wrote the response. It took me 3 hours. I documented, with dates and timestamps from the internal system, every interaction between my shift and the brand team going back to my first day. I documented the routing glitch on Tuesday of the second week. I documented the escalation of the lane request. I documented the operational rationale for every decision. I documented that Sloane Whitaker at Vassar and Greer had, as a brand coordinator, filed a formal request through the proper channel that established the Lane 7 policy. That the policy had been approved. That I had applied it without reference to any personal relationship, that I had, in fact, given Davina's campaign its own dedicated outbound lane on Lane 8 with the same priority as Lane 7, and that I had not, in any of these decisions, given or withheld priority based on personal considerations. I sent the response to Carissa at 4:47 p.m. on Tuesday. I didn't go home that night. I sat in my car in the parking lot for 45 minutes. I called Joaquin. He told me to breathe. I breathed. I called my mother. She told me, in Spanish, tu silencio es tu defensa. Your silence is your defense. She told me to call her back after I had eaten something. I drove to White Castle. I ate 4 sliders alone in my car. I thought about my father, who left, and I thought about Marisol, who stayed. And I thought about Percy Ye. who had trained me well and who would have shaken her head at the way the office was treating the situation. On Thursday, I got the result. Carissa called me into the glass conference room again, and Garrison was there. And a third person I had not yet met, a woman from the outside HR partner named Tanisha LaRue. Tanisha was older and professional in the way a person is professional when they have done this work for 25 years and don't have time for nonsense. She said the complaint had been reviewed. She said the evidence did not support the allegation. She said the Lane 7 policy had been requested through the proper channel by a brand coordinator who was unrelated to me. She said I had given Davina's campaign an equivalent dedicated lane and had documented this decision properly. She said no disciplinary action would be taken against me. She said, however, that because there was now a documented conflict between me and my spouse operating in adjacent parts of the business, the company would, with my consent, offer Davina the option of a structured internal conversation with her own leadership team to discuss the impact of the complaint and any future interaction between her team and my shift. She also said, I want to write this carefully because it matters. She said that because Davina had filed the complaint and the complaint had been investigated and found unsupported on its merits, Davina's name had been formally noted as the complainant in a confidential file. That this would not be shared with anyone outside of HR and senior leadership. That there would be no retaliation, but that going forward, Davina's standing in any review process that involved me would necessarily carry the fact that she had filed this complaint and that the complaint had not been substantiated. I asked Tanisha, did my wife know this when she filed it? Tanisha looked at me. Tanisha said, that is a question I cannot answer for you, Ezra. But I can tell you that every employee is trained on the internal complaint procedure during onboarding, and that the procedure clearly states that complaints found unsupported may be noted in the employee's file. Whether your wife recalled that detail when she filed, I do not know. I said, thank you. Garrison said, Ezra, I want you to know that I have been doing this for a long time. And I have seen this kind of thing go badly in a lot of companies. And I have seen it go well in a few. The way it goes well is when the supervisor keeps doing the job. So keep doing the job. I said, I will. I drove home. I sat in the driveway for 10 minutes. Then I went inside. Davina was on the couch. She looked up when I came in. Her eyes were red. Ezra, she said, yes, they called me today. I know. I didn't think it through. I was angry. You gave Sloane something I had been asking for, and I felt passed over. And I felt like you were choosing her over me, and I panicked. I filed the complaint because I thought it would force them to give me the priority I wanted. And I thought it would look like a legitimate process complaint and not like what it actually was. Which was me using my role as your wife to try to get you to give my client the thing I wanted. And I see now that what I did was wrong. I see now that I undermined the only good thing that has happened to you in years because I couldn't stand not being the priority for 1 second. I sat down. I put my keys on the table. I looked at her. Do you know what Percy told me on my second day? I said. No. She told me that the shift was mine to run. And that the most important part of running it was to be consistent. She told me that workers can forgive a hard decision. They cannot forgive an inconsistent one. They forgive a hard decision because they know it was made for the right reason. They cannot forgive an inconsistent one because they know it was made for the wrong reason. I'm sorry, she said. I believe you. What do? We do the thing every couple in this situation is supposed to do. Which is the thing nobody in this situation actually does. We tell the truth. We tell Sloane, Mallory, my mother, your parents, my team, your team, the people we work with, and the people we love, exactly what happened. We tell them that you filed a complaint against me that was not supported. We tell them that it was because you were trying to force a business outcome through a personal channel. We tell them that I forgave you. And then we live with the consequences of that. She cried. She cried for a long time. I held her for a long time. We made a plan. The next week, Davina went into her own leadership one-on-one with her director. A woman named Colleen Whitfield, who was, I am told, both kind and direct. Davina told Colleen what had happened. Davina told Colleen that the complaint had been hers, that it had not been supported. That she had filed it in anger and with a personal motive that was not consistent with the company's values, and that she wanted to withdraw it from her file and replace it with a personal note of apology and an honest reflection. Colleen agreed to that. The note went into the file. Then Davina sat down with Sloane Whitaker at Vassar and Greer, not the friend from Butler, the coworker, and told her that she had been jealous of Sloane's initiative and that she had taken it out on Ezra and that she was sorry. Sloane, I am told, said, Davina, I know. I've known since the week the policy went in. I'm glad you told me. We move on. Then we told our families. Marisol cried a second time, and this time she cried with relief. Joaquin made a face at the dinner table when we told him and said, "You need to take her to church." I said, "I'll take her to church if she wants to go." My mother took Davina's hand across the table and said, in English, for Davina's benefit, "Because Davina's Spanish is still developing, I forgive you, mija. I forgave you before you asked." Blythe and Wendell, when we told them, did not apologize. Blythe said, "Well, you know, Ezra, Davina has always been intense about her work." Wendell said, "Sounds like you two handled it." That was all they said. That is the shape of the apology I will receive from them for the rest of my life. I have accepted that. 2 months later, Davina transferred off the brand team, by her own request, to a new internal role within the company that has no direct operational interface with my shift. She asked for the transfer because, as she told Carissa in writing, "I want to be able to go home at night and be Ezra's wife without the responsibility of being the person whose work depends on the person he supervises. Because I was bad at that responsibility and I do not want to be bad at it again." Carissa approved the transfer. Carissa told me that Davina had handled it, in her words, with more grace than most people would have. I agreed. My shift is still mine. My team is still mine. The Lane 7 policy is still in place. The Lane 8 policy is still in place. The temp who made the routing glitch has been replaced by a more experienced operator named Yusuf Braddock, who has not made the same mistake since his 3rd week. Tobias Eklund has been promoted to senior team lead. Ines Covarrubias has been promoted to assistant supervisor. Matteo Falcone has stopped being clumsy with authority and started being graceful with it. Lamar Oxley told me last month, as he was clocking out, "Colburn, you ain't perfect, but you're steady." That is the best compliment I have ever received from a 14-year warehouse veteran. I plan to earn it for a long time. Sloan Whitaker at Vassar and Greer is now dating Garrison Quintero, my boss, which is a development I have filed away as office gossip I am not going to touch with a 10-foot pole. The Sloan from Butler, my wife's friend, got engaged in Lake Tahoe to a man named Felix Auerbach, who is, according to Mallory, a wonderful person. Mallory is now an accountant at a firm in Indianapolis, and she sent us a card at Christmas that said, in her small accountant handwriting, "I am glad everything turned out the way it did." Blythe still calls me Ezra, without the diminutive. Wendell still calls me my boy. My father did not call. My mother did not expect him to. There is a line at the end of the old Wendell Harkavy dinner that I have not told you about yet. When Blythe had finished laughing at the "shelf boy" joke, and Davina had finished laughing after her, and Wendell had patted my hand, Mallory, who had been quiet the entire dinner, leaned forward and poured herself another glass of wine and said, very softly, into her glass, in a voice only I could hear, "He unloads trucks, Blythe. He unloads the trucks that deliver the shelves are stocked on." Blythe did not catch it. Sloan did not catch it. Davina did not catch it. I caught it. Mallory looked at me. I nodded at her. We did not discuss it that night. We have not discussed it since. Mallory's quiet, sideways correction of Blythe was the kindest thing a person has done for me in a long time, and it is the thing I think about when I think about the whole arc of the last year. Of the dinner at Carmela's, of the offer at Vassar and Greer, of the conversation in the glass conference room, of the apology in my kitchen, of the conversation in Carissa's office, of the apologies that came after, and of Blythe still calling me Ezra without the diminutive. I am not asking for sympathy. I had a hard year and the year is over. I have a job I am proud of. I have a wife who is not the woman she was at the dinner at Carmela's. And I do not mean that to be a kind thing or a cruel thing. I mean it to be an honest thing. I have a mother who taught me not to make myself small. I have a brother-in-law who taught me to listen to myself when I am afraid. I have a friend named Mallory who corrected a small cruelty at a dinner table without anyone noticing but the person who needed the correction. I have a new father-in-law relationship I have made peace with, which is to say I have accepted the limits of it. I have a job I earned by my own work and kept by my own work and which I am going to keep doing by my own work for as long as the company will have me. There is one last thing. The night I came home from my first day as supervisor, Davina was sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of wine and I told her the whole story of my day and she listened and she asked me questions and when I was done she said, "Tell me about a hard decision you made today." I told her about a worker named Letitia who had been slowing down on her lift operation and who I had pulled aside and asked, gently, if everything was okay at home. Letitia had broken down in my office. Her mother was sick. She was afraid to miss shifts. I had reassured her that her shifts were protected and that we would work around her appointments. for as long as she needed. Davina listened to this story and she said, that was the right call. I said, what if I'd made the wrong call? She said, you wouldn't have. You would have asked someone. That's what you're good at. You're good at asking. I am good at asking. Story 3. My brother stole Grandma's house before the funeral. He didn't know she left me one final letter. I need to get this off my chest because my family has been acting like I'm the villain for not quietly letting this go. And I honestly don't know if I'm losing my mind or if everyone around me has just decided that. Grief means Derek gets to do whatever he wants. My grandmother, Evelyn, died 3 weeks ago on a Wednesday morning at 6:12. I know the exact time because I was the one the hospice nurse called. Not my dad, not my brother, not my Aunt Sharon, me. I had been staying with Grandma on and off for the last 6 months because her health had gone downhill fast after Christmas. She had congestive heart failure. Arthritis so bad in her hands she could barely button her sweaters. And one of those stubborn personalities that made every doctor sound like an idiot if they told her to slow down. She still insisted on watering her roses even when she had to sit in a plastic lawn chair to do it. I'm 29, single, and I work remote doing payroll for a trucking company. So out of everyone in the family, I was the one who could actually be there. Derek is 34 and has never been available for anything unless there's money, attention, or a chance to look like the golden grandson in front of strangers. My dad, Ronald, is Evelyn's only son, but he checked out of most emotional responsibilities sometime around 1998 and never really checked back in. Sharon is my dad's sister-in-law through his second marriage to my stepmom Linda. And somehow she still treated Grandma's illness like it was a scheduling inconvenience for her. Church lunches. Grandma and I were close in a very plain way. Not movie close. We didn't have dramatic heart-to-heart talks on porches every sunset. It was quieter than that. She was the one who taught me how to pay bills on time. How to keep extra cash folded into an old coffee tin in case the bank did something stupid. How to tell when somebody was only being nice because they wanted control. She'd say, pretty words cost nothing, Hannah. Watch what people do when no one is clapping. That was very Evelyn. Blunt enough to sting, accurate enough to stick. I'm Hannah, by the way. And I know some people are going to read this and think I'm about to admit this is really about inheritance, but I swear the house was not what I cared about most. What I cared about was the fact that my grandmother had not even been buried yet when my brother started acting like he was king of the property. Grandma's house is in a small town outside Columbus, Ohio. It's a white 2-story place with green shutters, a cracked front walkway, and a backyard big enough for 2 maple trees and a vegetable patch she pretended was just a hobby, even though it fed half the neighborhood every summer. She had lived there for 43 years. My grandfather, Walter, built the back deck himself before I was born. Every mark in that house meant something. Pencil lines on the pantry wall where she measured me and Derek as kids. A burn mark near the stove from Thanksgiving in 2007 when my cousin Paige dropped a hot tray and Grandma refused to let anyone call 911 because she said the sweet potatoes were still salvageable. The upstairs guest room still had yellow wallpaper from the 80s because she claimed replacing. It was a waste of good money when walls don't care what they look like. After she died, I did what had to be done. I met the hospice nurse. I called the funeral home. I found Grandma's blue folder with all her account information because she'd shown me where it was months ago and told me, very calmly, when I go, your father will be useless and your brother will become enterprising. Open this first. I remember laughing when she said it because it sounded so sharp. And she just looked at me and said, I'm serious. I thought she was exaggerating. She was not exaggerating. Derek didn't even come to the house until that evening, and when he got there, he didn't hug me first. He didn't ask how her final hours were. He didn't even go sit in her bedroom for a minute like a normal person might. He walked in with his wife, Kelsey, looked around the living room, and asked if I knew where Grandma kept the deed and the safe deposit key. Those were his first words to me. I actually thought I heard him wrong. I was on the couch in the same sweatshirt I'd slept in, surrounded by sympathy flowers and casseroles I didn't want. I said, what? He repeated himself like I was being difficult. The house papers. Do you know where they are? I stared at him for a second and asked him if he was serious. Kelsey gave me this tight little look, the kind that says she already thinks you're dramatic, and said, we're just trying to help get things organized. That phrase, trying to help get things organized, became their favorite line for the next week. Every time they crossed a line, touched something they shouldn't, or pushed a decision nobody asked them to make, they wrapped it in that exact sentence like it made them civic heroes. I told Derek I had Grandma's folder and that nothing needed to happen that night. He asked to see it. I said no. He got offended immediately and said he was family, as if I wasn't. That first night should have told me everything, but grief makes you slower than you think. You keep assuming people will return to normal decency any minute now because surely no one would. Really turn a death into a scavenger hunt. I underestimated him. 2 days later, I got to Grandma's house around 9 in the morning after meeting with the funeral director, Mr. Collins, and my key didn't work. At first I thought I was using the back door key on the front lock by mistake. Because Grandma had 2 nearly identical brass keys with old pink nail polish on the tops. I tried both. Nothing. Then I noticed the lock itself was new. I just stood there on the porch with my garment bag from the funeral home appointment hanging off one shoulder and stared at the doorknob like it was speaking a language I didn't know. Then Derek opened the door from inside. He smiled. Actually smiled, like this was perfectly reasonable. I asked him why the locks had been changed. He said, because there are a lot of people in and out right now and we need to protect the property. I said, we. He sighed like I was exhausting him. Hannah, don't start. I asked him for a key. He said he'd make me one later. I said, this is Grandma's house. And he said, exactly, and someone has to take charge. There are moments where you realize a conversation is no longer happening on the same planet for both people. That was one of them. I pushed past him and walked inside. The living room furniture was shoved around. Grandma's china cabinet was open. The hallway closet had empty boxes on the floor. Kelsey was in the dining room taping labels on things. Labels. Blue painter's tape with writing on it in thick black marker. Keep, sell, donate, on my dead grandmother's belongings. I felt physically sick. I asked them what the hell they were doing. And Kelsey said they were starting the process, because the estate would need to be handled efficiently. Derek chimed in and said he had already talked to a realtor friend named Brent who told him the market was hot and houses in that area were moving fast if they were cleaned up. Cleaned up. The funeral had not even happened yet. Grandma's body was still at the funeral home. And these two were in her dining room deciding whether to donate the Afghan she'd made by hand. Because it didn't fit the vibe. That is a real thing, Kelsey said. Didn't fit the vibe. I told them to stop touching things. Derek told me to calm down. I know people joke about that phrase. But hearing it in that moment nearly made me black out from anger. I asked who gave him authority to change the locks and sort the property. He said Dad agreed that someone needed to step up. My father had apparently told him, over the phone, that he could handle the house stuff. Now, Dad later claimed that by handle the house stuff, he only meant make sure the pipes didn't freeze and maybe mow the lawn if it got bad. But Derek took that vague permission and sprinted with it like a criminal who found a loophole. I called Dad right there in front of them. He didn't answer. I called Linda. She answered on the 3rd ring and was already irritated, like my timing was rude. I told her Derek had changed the locks on Grandma's house. She paused, then said, well, maybe that's for the best with all the family coming around. I said, what family? We have barely had any visitors. Then she lowered her voice and said, honey, your brother is just trying to prevent confusion. Confusion. That was the word they kept using after that. As if me objecting to a hostile takeover of a dead woman's home was the source of confusion. Not the man with a label maker and a fresh lock set. I hung up because I knew if I stayed on the phone any longer I'd say something I could never take back. I spent that day following Derek room to room, taking photos of everything with timestamps because some part of me suddenly understood I was going to need proof. He mocked me for it and said, go ahead, play detective. Kelsey stopped speaking to me entirely and started texting on her phone every time I walked near her. At one point I found a small velvet jewelry box from Grandma's dresser sitting open on the kitchen counter with her brooches dumped out beside it. I picked them up and put them in my tote bag because I didn't trust those two for 1 second. That night, I drove back to my apartment with a migraine so bad I threw up in my sink. I barely slept. At 7:30 the next morning, I called the attorney whose business card Grandma had tucked into the blue folder. Her name was Rebecca Sloan. That was the first moment in the whole mess that I felt like the floor stopped tilting. Rebecca answered her own phone. She sounded about 50, brisk, and very unimpressed by nonsense, which is exactly what I needed. I explained that my grandmother had died, that there was a will I had not yet seen, and that my brother had changed the locks and started sorting the house before probate or any formal process had begun. Rebecca did not react the way my family had. She didn't tell me to be understanding or that emotions were high. She said, very clearly, did he have legal authority to do that? I said I didn't think so. She said, then he needs to stop immediately. I could have cried from relief. She told me Grandma had updated her will and related documents a year earlier. Rebecca could not discuss every detail over the phone until she verified some things. But she did confirm that Derek was not the executor. Neither was my father. I was. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed and gripping the phone so hard my fingers hurt. I said, "I'm sorry, what?" And Rebecca said, "Your grandmother appointed you as executor of her estate." She was very explicit. There are no words for the mix of grief and vindication I felt in that second. I wasn't happy. Not exactly. I would have traded every legal document on earth to have Grandma back in that house, drinking weak tea and criticizing the weather. But underneath the grief, there was this fierce little flame of recognition. She knew exactly how this family operated, and she had prepared for it. Rebecca scheduled me to come to her office that afternoon. She told me not to argue with Derek any more than necessary and not to let property leave the home, if I could prevent it. She also said something that stuck with me. She said, "Families often reveal themselves during funerals and property transfers. Do not assume guilt will stop anyone from overreaching." When I got to her office, she gave me a copy of the will. I was executor, full stop. Grandma had also left specific cash gifts to a few people. $5,000 to Paige for her nursing school loans. $3,000 to the church food pantry. Her wedding ring to Sharon, which I thought was odd until I remembered Sharon had admired it for 20 years and Grandma probably wanted to avoid a fight. A smaller amount to my father. And then the house itself was to be sold unless I wanted to keep it, in which case I had first option to buy it from the estate at a fixed value she had set the year. She signed the will, not Derek, me, and then Rebecca handed me an envelope. It had my name on it in Grandma's handwriting, the looping, slightly shaky cursive I had seen on birthday cards my whole life. Rebecca said Grandma had left it with instructions that I was to receive it only after her death, and only if Rebecca believed I was being pressured by family. I laughed when she said that, but it came out as a weird broken sound. Because of course Grandma had written a contingency letter for family nonsense. Of course she had. I opened it right there. It wasn't long, 1 page, but I think I will remember every line of it until I die. She wrote that if I was reading it, then matters had already become ugly. She said Derek loved shortcuts more than he loved people and that my father confused avoiding conflict with being a good man. She said not to let either of them make me think kindness required surrender. Then she wrote that the house was not just wood and shingles. It was the one thing she and Walter had built together from the ground up, and if I wanted it. She wanted me to have a fair chance at it because I was the only one who ever loved it as a home, instead of a prize. At the bottom she wrote, "You were the only one who stayed when there was no applause. Don't let them rewrite that." I had to sit in Rebecca's office and cry into one of those terrible rough office tissues while trying not to embarrass myself. Rebecca, being the human equivalent of a legal blade, waited until I was done and then asked if I wanted her to send a formal letter to my brother, instructing him to cease any interference with the estate. I said yes. Then I asked what would happen if he had already taken things. She looked at me and said, "Then we make a list." That same afternoon, Rebecca emailed and mailed a notice to Derek and Dad. I drove straight to Grandma's house with copies in my bag. When I got there, Derek's truck was in the driveway and Brent the realtor was there too, walking around outside measuring something near the garage. I wish I were making that up. I got out of my car and asked what they were doing. Brent looked awkward instantly. Derek tried to act casual and said they were just getting opinions. I handed Derek the letter. He skimmed it, laughed, then read it again more slowly. I watched the color drain out of his face in real time when he realized the attorney was real. The executor was me, and his fantasy of sliding into control had just hit a wall. He said, "This is ridiculous." I said, "No, changing the locks before Grandma's funeral was ridiculous." He asked if I was seriously going to make this adversarial. I said, "You did that when you put keep stickers on her silverware." Brent quietly left, which was probably smart. Derek went into full offense mode after that. According to him, I was unstable from grief, overreacting, being manipulated by a lawyer, and trying to cut the family out. That became the official narrative he spread to everybody who would listen. Sharon called me that night and said she understood I was hurting but legal threats were so harsh. Paige texted me privately to say she was on my side but didn't want to be dragged into it publicly, because Derek had already called her a traitor once over a fantasy football league. So she knew how vindictive he could get. Dad finally called me after dinner and spent 20 minutes asking why I had embarrassed Derek in front of a realtor instead of asking why Derek had invited a realtor to Grandma's house before we buried her. That was when I realized my father wasn't neutral. He was just lazy in a way that always favored the loudest person in the room. The funeral was 2 days later. I don't know if anyone who hasn't dealt with family greed around a death understands how surreal it is to stand beside a casket while knowing half the people hugging you are mentally inventorying furniture. My grandmother looked peaceful. That's what people always say, and this time it was even true. She looked small, though. Smaller than she had ever looked alive. The funeral home had dressed her in the navy dress she wore to church on Easter. And I kept staring at her hands because they were finally still. I gave the eulogy because no one else wanted to and because I couldn't bear the thought of Derek getting up there to perform grief. I talked about her garden, her terrible opinion that all restaurant coffee tasted burnt, her refusal to ever let anyone leave her house hungry, and the way she quietly took care of people without demanding credit. I did not mention the house. I did not mention the letter. I did not mention that half the people in the front pew had already shown me exactly who they were. After the burial, there was a reception in the church fellowship hall. Ham sandwiches, sheet cake, potato salad, coffee in styrofoam cups. Classic Ohio funeral spread. I was standing near the desserts when Kelsey cornered me and asked if I planned on dragging this out for months, because Derek was under a lot of stress. I said, Derek is under stress because he tried to take control of property that wasn't his. She folded her arms and told me that Grandma had always intended for the house to stay with the family, which was an interesting phrase considering I am also the family. Then she said something I'll never forget. She said, "You don't even have kids. Derek does. It makes more sense for them. They have one son, Mason, who is 6 and sticky all the time. I love Mason. None of this is his fault." But hearing Kelsey reduce the entire thing to reproductive worth made something inside me go cold. I told her my uterus was not a legal argument. She walked away offended, which was honestly the best possible outcome because I was one sentence from making a scene in a church basement. That evening, when most of the out-of-town relatives had gone home, I returned to Grandma's house alone for the first time since the funeral. I sat in her living room with the lamp on beside her chair and just listened to the house settle. It made the same sounds it always had. A vent clicking, a soft thump upstairs as the temperature changed, traffic faintly on the main road. I kept thinking about the letter in my bag and how clearly she had seen this coming. Not every detail, but the shape of it, the hunger, the manipulation, the way people who never sat through doctor appointments suddenly became experts on what was fair. The next morning, I started taking inventory. Rebecca had told me to document every room, every drawer, every item of obvious value. So I did. I opened cabinets and photographed dishes. I wrote down model numbers from appliances. I cataloged jewelry, silver, the cedar chest, my grandfather's tools, the old coin collection in the hall closet. It was exhausting and strangely intimate, like I was translating a whole life into evidence. That was when I noticed things missing. Grandma had a small oil painting of a red barn that hung in the upstairs hallway. Gone. My grandfather's military medals. Gone. The pearl earrings Grandma always wore on Christmas. Gone. A leather-bound family Bible from the living room side table. Gone. A heavy crystal candy dish from the dining room. Gone. The cash envelope she kept tucked inside an oatmeal tin in the pantry for repair men and emergencies. Gone. I checked my photos from the day Derek changed the locks. In 2 of them, I could see the red barn painting still hanging. In another, the candy dish was on the dining table. So sometime after that day, items had left the house. I sent everything to Rebecca. She told me not to accuse Derek directly yet. She wanted a clean list first. And she wanted me to remember that sometimes the threat of formal consequences brought missing items back faster than emotional pleading ever would. Rebecca had clearly done this kind of family war before. A week after the funeral, she arranged a meeting at her office with me, Derek, and Dad. Kelsey came too, even though no one invited her. Dad wore his "I hate conflict" face, which is basically just regular confusion with extra sighing. Derek came in swaggering like he still thought this was a negotiation between equals. Then Rebecca started talking. Watching a professional dismantle my brother was one of the most satisfying experiences of my life. She laid out the timeline. Evelyn's death, my appointment as executor, the unauthorized changing of locks, the premature attempts to sort and market the property, the preliminary inventory discrepancies, the demand for return of any estate property removed without authorization. She did it all in a voice so measured it somehow made the content hit harder. Derek kept interrupting to say he was just trying to help. Rebecca asked him whether help normally involved excluding the executor from access to the property. He said I was emotional and disorganized. Rebecca asked why that justified changing locks without permission. He said Dad verbally approved it. Rebecca asked if Dad had legal authority over the estate. Silence. Then she asked him whether he had removed any items from the home. Derek said no. Kelsey said, too quickly, only things that could have gotten damaged. He turned and stared at her. It was the first time in the whole mess I saw him genuinely rattled. Rebecca calmly asked her to clarify. Kelsey tried to backtrack, but it was too late. Over the next 5 minutes, it came out that she and Derek had taken a few sentimental items to their house for safekeeping. The medals, the pearl earrings, the candy dish, not the cash, of course, because they both denied knowing anything about that. The red barn painting had apparently been taken by accident during a carload of boxed items Kelsey moved into their basement because she didn't trust the open house traffic, which was funny because there was no authorized open house. I felt like I was watching someone confess to robbery while insisting they were acting as volunteer security guards. Rebecca instructed them to return everything within 48 hours. She also told them any further interference could expose them to civil liability and possibly criminal issues depending on the missing cash and documentation. Dad looked physically ill by then. Not because his mother had been disrespected, because consequences had entered the room. After the meeting, Dad tried to pull me aside in the parking lot and say maybe Rebecca was being a little aggressive. I asked him if he thought I was supposed to just let Derek loot the house because paperwork made him uncomfortable. He said, loot was an unfair word. I asked what word he preferred for taking property that didn't belong to you after changing the locks on the rightful executor. He had no answer. He just rubbed his forehead and told me families needed grace. That line made me angrier than almost anything Derek did. Because grace, in our family, had always meant the same thing. It meant I was expected to absorb harm quietly so nobody else had to feel bad. I stopped doing that. 2 days later, Derek and Kelsey returned a bunch of items in grocery bags. Grocery bags. Grandma's pearl earrings were tangled in the handles next to a half-used pack of baby wipes and a plastic dinosaur from Mason's room. My grandfather's medals were loose in a sandwich bag. The red barn painting had a scratch across one corner. I stood in Grandma's kitchen while Derek set the bags down and mumbled that the whole situation had gotten blown out of proportion. I said nothing. Then he had the nerve to ask whether I was planning to buy the house, because if not, he and Kelsey wanted first consideration before it went on the market. I actually laughed, not because it was funny, because the audacity was almost elegant in its purity. I told him that if I decided not to keep it, the house would be handled according to Grandma's estate plan, not according to his ambition. That was when he finally dropped the fake helpful act. He said Grandma had always favored me, that everyone knew it. That I manipulated lonely old people by playing caretaker. And that I only wanted the house because I had nothing else going on in my life. There it was, the real thing, not grief, not concern, resentment. For some context, Derek has always been one of those men who thinks charisma erases every unpaid debt. In high school, he borrowed my car and returned it with no gas. In college, he forgot to pay Grandma back for a down payment she gave him for a truck. At 30, he convinced Dad to co-sign a business loan for a landscaping company that lasted 8 months before collapsing under bad bookkeeping and Derek buying equipment he could not afford. Every failure was somebody else's fault. Every rescue was something he felt entitled to. I spent years telling myself he was irresponsible, selfish, immature. I did not fully accept that he was also willing to exploit grief until I watched him do it. I told him to leave. He did, but not before saying I'd regret making the family choose sides. The thing is, there really weren't sides in the dramatic way he imagined. There was just reality. And then there was Derek's version of reality where the loudest claim became the truth if he repeated it enough. For the next 2 weeks, I handled the estate the way Grandma had trusted me to. I met with the bank. I dealt with utility accounts. I sorted paperwork. I coordinated donations she had specified. I got the roof leak over the back porch inspected. I found old photos in the hall closet that made me stop and cry on the floor for 20 minutes. Because one of them was of Grandpa Walter holding me as a baby while Grandma looked at both of us like we were the most important things she had ever seen. In between all that, I kept finding little signs of Derek and Kelsey's interference. A missing file tab in Grandma's accordion folder. Drawer contents rearranged. The guest room closet emptied of blankets because Kelsey had apparently taken them to wash and forgotten to bring them back. A handwritten recipe card gone from the kitchen tin. When I asked about that one later, she said she thought it was just a spare. It was Grandma's biscuit recipe, written in her own hand. I got it back, but with grease on the corner. The legal side moved more slowly than my anger wanted. Probate always does. But every time I started feeling guilty, I'd reread Grandma's letter. Especially the line about kindness not requiring surrender. I had spent so much of my life being the easier child, the flexible one. The one who didn't make scenes. And because of that, people kept assuming I would bend forever. One Sunday, about 2 weeks after the funeral, I was in Grandma's backyard pulling dead tomato vines when her next-door neighbor, Mike Reynolds, leaned over the fence and asked if things had settled down. Mike is in his 60s, retired from the post office, and has known my family longer than I've been alive. He and Grandma traded produce and gossip every summer. I said not really, and he nodded like that tracked with what he'd seen. Then he told me he had watched Derek and Kelsey loading boxes into their SUV the day after Grandma died. He thought maybe I knew. When he saw the realtor later in the week, he figured the house stuff had gotten ugly. I asked him if he'd be willing to tell Rebecca that if needed. He said yes without hesitation. That conversation mattered more than I can explain. Not just because it supported my timeline, but because it reminded me I wasn't crazy. Someone else had seen what I saw. Family gaslighting works best in isolation. Once an outside person calmly confirms reality, the spell breaks. A few days later, another piece fell into place. I was cleaning out the hall desk when I found a check register and an old envelope tucked behind it. Inside was a withdrawal slip for $2,000 from Grandma's bank account dated about a month before she died. That alone wasn't alarming because she occasionally took cash out for household work. But clipped to it was a sticky note in her writing that said, "Gave Derek nothing further. Asked again. Nothing further. Asked again." I just sat there staring at it. I remembered something then. A conversation from maybe 6 weeks before Grandma died. She was in her recliner, rubbing lotion into her hands. And she'd said Derek had stopped by asking whether she planned to do anything smart with the house while she was still alive. I asked what he meant. She rolled her eyes and said, "He meant sell it to him cheap so he could rescue me from my own stairs." Then she said, "I told him if he wants property, he can try earning some." At the time, I thought it was just one more tacky Derek moment. I didn't realize he had been circling the house before she was even gone. Rebecca added Mike's statement and the sticky note to the file. She also told me something important. Even if criminal charges never materialized, detailed documentation mattered because it preserved the truth. People like Derek count on time blurring things, on relatives getting tired, on the emotional version of, "let's just move on." Records prevent that. Meanwhile, the family narrative kept mutating. First I was grieving irrationally. Then I was power hungry. Then I was ungrateful because Derek had done so much work at the house. Then Sharon, who somehow always arrives late but still has opinions, suggested maybe Grandma had been manipulated in her final year because older people can be influenced. That one almost made me laugh in her face. Anyone who knew Evelyn for more than 10 seconds knew you did not influence her into anything. If anything, she influenced you into taking a sweater because you looked cold whether you were cold or not. I told Sharon exactly that. She said she was only raising concerns. I said the concern I had was that people who barely visited were suddenly deeply invested in assets. Paige later texted me, "I wish I had your nerve." I told her it wasn't nerve. It was being too tired to keep pretending. By the third week, I had to make a real decision about the house. I could exercise my option and buy it at the value Grandma had fixed in the will, which was lower than the current market but still a serious financial stretch for me. Or I could let the estate sell it and move on. Rebecca told me to think about it without pressure. That sentiment and practicality sometimes had to wrestle a while before either one won. Dad, of course, suddenly had opinions about fairness again. He said if I got a discounted opportunity, maybe Derek should be allowed to make a matching offer. Rebecca shut that down fast because that was not how any of this worked. I spent 3 nights sleeping at Grandma's house to figure out what I wanted. The first night felt unbearable. The second felt sad but familiar. By the third night, I made coffee in her kitchen at sunrise and watched the backyard light up through the sink window and realized I was not imagining another person's home when I stood there. I was imagining mine, not because I won some contest, not because it was owed to me as payment for caregiving, but because loving a place for what it is, not what it can be flipped for, means something. Grandma knew that, so I told Rebecca I wanted to buy it. The second that became real, Derek lost his mind. Apparently Dad told Linda, Linda told Sharon, Sharon told somebody at church. And by dinner time Derek was calling me 6 times in a row. I ignored him. Then came the texts. "Unbelievable, you really planned this. You were working her the whole time. Hope you enjoy living in a graveyard." That last one was so grotesque I saved screenshots immediately. Kelsey sent one too, which almost impressed me in its lack of self-awareness. She wrote, "Think about what kind of example this sets for Mason when family becomes transactional." Transactional. From the woman who put sell stickers on my grandmother's dishes before the funeral. I did not answer either of them. Instead, I kept moving. Appraisal coordination, financing meetings, more paperwork, estate account steps. It was exhausting, but it was real work. And real work has a way of steadying you when emotions threaten to swallow everything. Then came the part one still haven't told most people because it feels too raw. The night before I signed the initial purchase documents, I reread Grandma's letter again in her bedroom. There was one line on the back I had somehow overlooked before because it had been written sideways. In the margin, tiny, almost like an afterthought, it said, "Check Walter's tackle box if you need courage." I had no idea what that meant. Grandpa's old fishing tackle box was in the garage on a high shelf behind jars of screws and a broken weed trimmer. I climbed up and got it down. Inside were rusted lures, hooks, sinkers, a folding knife, and underneath the tray, a sealed envelope. This one said, "For Hannah, if the house ever becomes a fight." I just stared at it for a full minute before opening it. Inside was a photocopy of a cashier's check from years ago and 2 handwritten notes. One note was from Grandpa Walter. The other was from Grandma. Grandpa's note explained that the original down payment assistance they gave Derek for his truck had actually been the second large bailout, not the first, and that he and Grandma had already decided back then that any future major asset help for Derek would have to be treated as his advance from the estate whether he admitted it or not. Grandma's note said she never formally deducted every dollar because life got complicated and peace was expensive. But she wanted me to know that fairness in this family had already been distorted for years in Derek's favor. She wrote, "If he calls you selfish, remember how often he was helped before anyone called him that." I had to sit on the garage floor after that, because that was the hidden wound underneath all of this, I think. My whole life, Derek got rescued so often that the rescue itself became invisible. Then when I received one clear act of trust from Grandma, suddenly I was the favored one. People don't count benefits given to the loud child because they become part of the weather. That envelope didn't change the legal situation much, but emotionally it changed everything for me. It stripped away the last of the guilt. I closed on the house auction process with the estate a week later. Dad didn't come. Derek obviously didn't. Paige sent me flowers with a note that said, "She'd be glad it's you." Rebecca shook my hand after the final signatures and said, "Your grandmother planned better than most living people." I told her that sounded exactly like Evelyn. The worst part, somehow, was that even after all that, the family kept trying to act like reconciliation was available if only I stopped being so intense about the details. Sharon called to ask whether I'd host Thanksgiving in the house for Grandma's memory, as if the past month hadn't happened. Linda suggested that maybe giving Derek a few pieces of furniture would heal things. Dad said maybe once everything calmed down we could all laugh about the misunderstanding. There are some sentences so offensive they become almost abstract. Laugh about the misunderstanding was one of them. Because let me be clear, my brother changed the locks on a dead woman's home before her funeral. He started sorting her belongings. He contacted a realtor. He removed items. He lied about it. He attacked my motives when he got caught. And now my family wants to turn the whole thing into one unfortunate little mix-up because the truth is too ugly to hold in daylight. I'm not willing to do that. I moved into the house last weekend. The first night, I slept in the guest room because I still can't bring myself to take Grandma's bedroom. I left the hallway light on because she always did. In the morning, I made biscuits from the grease-stained recipe card Kelsey called a spare. They came out a little flat because I overworked the dough. And I actually laughed alone in the kitchen because Grandma would have acted like I committed a crime against flour. I've started cleaning out drawers slowly, not throwing her away, just making space carefully. Her gardening gloves are still by the back door. Her sweater is still on the hook in the hall. Her church bulletin from the last Sunday she was healthy enough to attend is still folded on the side table. Some people might think that's morbid. It doesn't feel morbid, it feels honest. Love doesn't vanish on a legal timeline. Derek has stopped contacting me directly for now, though I heard through Paige that he's telling people I stole his son's future. That's rich coming from a man who saw his grandmother's death as a real estate opportunity. If he wants to hate me, fine. He already did, in the only way that mattered. He just hid it under helpfulness until paperwork forced honesty. What gets me most is that I still miss the version of a brother I kept hoping he might become. I miss the fantasy of a family that would show up and grieve together and maybe fight over old photo albums in a sentimental way, not in a legal way. I miss being able to call my dad and believe he'd care more about right and wrong than about what Keeps dinner quiet. Losing grandma was one grief. Watching what came after was another. But I also keep thinking about that line in her letter. You were the only one who stayed when there was no applause. I didn't stay because I wanted a reward. I stayed because she was my grandmother and I loved her and she mattered when nobody was watching. If that makes certain people uncomfortable now, maybe that discomfort belongs to them. So here I am, sitting at Evelyn and Walter's old kitchen table. In the house my brother thought he could take before we even laid her to rest. Writing this because I needed somewhere to put the truth where it can't be softened into family. Mythology later. He stole what he could, tried to steal what he couldn't. And counted on me being too heartbroken and too polite to stop him. He was wrong. Story 4. My mother said I didn't deserve the family business, so I bought the company that owned hers. I have gone back and forth on posting this because every time I tell people in real life what happened, I either get a blank stare or they laugh like I am exaggerating. I am not exaggerating. If anything, I usually leave parts out because the full story makes my family sound like the kind of people you only believe exist in movies about inheritance and revenge. I am 34, and for most of my life I thought I knew exactly where I stood in my family. My mother, Diane, built a regional home decor chain called Waverly House. It started as one store when I was a kid and grew into 11 locations across 3 states. My father, Martin, handled the books in the early years, but my mother was always the face of it. People treated her like she was some kind of local legend. She was on Chamber of Commerce panels, she got interviewed in regional magazines. She gave talks to women entrepreneur groups, and she loved every second of it. If you asked anyone outside our family, they would have said I was lucky. I grew up with money, connections, and a business waiting for me. If you asked my mother, she would have told you I had every advantage and still somehow managed to disappoint her. I am the oldest of 3. Then there is my sister, Lauren, who is 31, and my brother, Chase, who is 28. Lauren is my mother's favorite in the most obvious, impossible to deny way. Not because Lauren is smarter or more capable, although my mother says that constantly. But because Lauren learned early how to orbit my mother without ever challenging her. Lauren has a talent for making people feel admired. And my mother feeds on admiration the way some people feed on oxygen. Chase is the baby, and in our family that translated into permanent immunity. He could get arrested and somehow my mother would blame the officer for having a bad attitude. He has never held a job longer than 18 months, but according to her, he is still finding his lane. When I was 22 and working 60-hour weeks, she called me rigid. When Chase was 26 and living in a downtown condo she paid for, he was creative. I was the kid who wanted structure. I liked numbers, schedules, margins, supplier agreements, staffing models. I was the one who sat in the back office after school learning inventory software because I thought it mattered. When other kids my age were sneaking beer into house parties, I was doing closeout counts and learning what shrinkage meant. I really believed that if I worked hard enough, if I proved I cared enough, eventually my mother would see me as her successor. That sounds pathetic now, and maybe it was. But when you are raised in a family business, it gets braided into your identity so tightly that you cannot always tell where your ambition ends and your need for approval begins. I went to college in Ohio, got a business degree, and came straight back to work for Waverly House. My mother made a huge show of telling everyone she did not believe in nepotism. Which was funny because she absolutely did, just selectively. Lauren was handed a brand strategy role 2 weeks after graduating with a communications degree, and spent most of her time staging photo shoots and posting captions about curated living. Chase got a special projects position that nobody could explain, which mostly meant he popped into stores, flirted with employees, suggested trendy product lines he saw on social media, and disappeared. I started as an assistant operations manager for one store. I did payroll corrections, vendor disputes, late truck unloads, employee complaints, and holiday scheduling. Then I became district manager, then director of operations, then COO by the time I was 32. Though my mother refused to let that title be public on the website because she said customers preferred a family-led image, and too many executive titles felt corporate. What she meant was she did not want people asking if she planned to step down. The first time I realized I was never going to inherit that business was 6 years ago at Thanksgiving. We were at my parents' lake house. My Aunt Susan had too much wine and said something light like, "Well, Emma's the obvious heir, right?" That was me. Emma. My mother laughed. Not a polite laugh. The kind you do when someone has made a genuinely silly mistake. She said, "Emma is a worker. Heirs need instinct." The whole table got quiet. I remember staring down at the sweet potatoes while Lauren smirked into her glass like she was trying to hide it. Chase was on his phone. My father made that face he always made. The one where he knew something ugly had happened but had already decided not to get involved. I asked what that meant, and my mother waved her hand and said, "Don't be dramatic. I mean vision. You're good at keeping trains on the tracks. That's not the same as laying new tracks." Then she changed the subject. That sentence sat in my chest for years. Worker, not heir. I should explain something important about Waverly House. My mother talked about it like she owned every inch of it outright, but she did not. About 8 years before everything blew up, she sold a controlling interest to a private holding company called Ashford Retail Group. On paper, it was supposed to be a strategic partnership. In reality, Waverly House had expanded too fast, debt had piled up, and she needed a cash infusion. She kept a significant minority stake, kept her CEO title, and kept acting like nothing had changed. Most customers did not know. A lot of employees did not know either. The family story remained that this was Diane's empire. She liked it that way. I knew because operations had to work with Ashford systems. Their people reviewed our quarterly performance, our lease exposure, our logistics inefficiencies. All of it. I met them on Zoom calls. Sometimes in person. They were the kind of polished executives who used words like synergy without irony. I hated them at first because they asked smart questions my mother did not like answering. And then she took that frustration out on me. Still, I learned from them. Especially from one executive named Nathan Cole, who oversaw specialty retail acquisitions. He was blunt, detail-oriented, and never tried to charm anyone. I respected that. He seemed to respect competence, which was refreshing after a lifetime of being treated like a pair of reliable hands instead of a brain. Over time, I became the person Ashford people reached out to when they wanted real numbers. If they asked my mother why gross margins were slipping in seasonal inventory, she would spend 15 minutes talking about macroeconomic softness and customer mood shifts. If they asked me, I would say Lauren overbought imported ceramics at the wrong price point and Chase pushed a men's gift line that sat untouched for 9 months. This did not make me popular at home. 2 years ago, my mother started making louder noises about succession planning. But not in a serious legal sense. More in a performative, manipulative way. She would bring it up at family dinners so everybody had to compete in front of her. She would say things like, "A company needs someone bold." Then look at Lauren. Or, "Fresh energy matters." Then glance at Chase. If she acknowledged me at all, it was to mention how indispensable I was in operations. Which was her way of chaining me to the engine room while she handed somebody else the wheel. I kept waiting for my father to step in. He never did. The breaking point came last fall at the annual leadership retreat. Ashford required one every year. Senior managers, store leads, merchandising heads, finance, and executives all met at a resort outside Asheville to review the year and plan the next one. My mother loved those retreats because she could do her founder routine in front of an audience. We had a dinner the first night in a private room. Candles, wine, fake warmth, all of it. At some point one of the store managers, a guy named Ryan who had worked with us forever, made a toast and said it was exciting to think about the next generation of leadership. My mother stood up with her glass and gave this speech about legacy and passion and vision. Then she said, "Building something from nothing teaches you not everyone deserves the keys just because they were born in the garage." People laughed awkwardly because they did not know if it was a joke. Then she looked directly at me. She did not name me, but she did not have to. I felt every face in that room flick toward me and away again. I asked her, right there, "Are you talking about me?" And she said, "If the shoe fits, Emma." There was a horrible silence. Nathan from Ashford was at the next table over, and I remember him setting his fork down. My father stared at his plate. Lauren looked embarrassed for exactly 3 seconds, then fascinated. Like this was better than television. Chase muttered, "Jesus," but not because he cared about me. Because public scenes make him uncomfortable. I stood up and told my mother if she wanted to discuss my value to the company, she could do it in the boardroom or not at all. Then I left. I cried in the parking lot for maybe 10 minutes, then I got angry enough to stop. The next morning I had 3 voicemails from my mother telling me not to be oversensitive. One text from Lauren saying she was drinking, let it go. And one email from Nathan asking if I was available for coffee before the first session. That coffee changed my life. He did not sugarcoat anything. He said the board had concerns about Waverly House for a while. Growth had stalled. Vendor relations were messy. Marketing spend was bloated. My mother resisted changes because she took oversight as insult. Internal confidence in succession was low. Lauren was viewed as style without substance. Chase was viewed as chaos and loafers. Those were not his exact words, but close enough. Then he asked me a question nobody in my family had ever asked me seriously. "What do you want, Emma?" I said I wanted to run the company properly. He nodded and asked, "Then why are you still acting like permission has to come from Diane?" I remember just staring at him because it sounded so obvious when he said it. And yet it felt like he had spoken in another language. He told me Ashford was considering a broader restructuring of its retail portfolio. Waverly House was one asset among several. If the right proposal came along, they would consider selling their stake. Not to my mother, because she did not have the liquidity and had damaged trust. But to an outside buyer, maybe. Or to management, if management had backing. I laughed because I assumed he was speaking hypothetically. I did not come from private equity money. I was not secretly sitting on millions. Nathan asked if I had ever considered approaching investors. I said no. He said maybe I should. The whole rest of that day, I sat through presentations and heard almost nothing. All I could think was that there might be a world in which I did not have to wait for my mother to die, retire, or love me enough to hand me something. There might be a world in which I could take it another way. I did not move fast. This was not some movie montage where I walked out and bought a company by Friday. What happened next took 9 months, and it nearly wrecked my nerves. I started by talking to a friend from business school named Caleb, who worked in corporate law in Chicago. We had stayed loosely in touch over the years. He was one of those irritatingly calm people who can hear something insane and immediately start sorting it into practical steps. He told me 3 things. First, do not say a word to family. Second, do not do anything using company resources, company time, or company confidential information beyond what I legitimately had access to in my role. Third, if I was serious, I needed my own counsel, my own financial advisor, and people who understood management buyouts. That was the first time I really let myself believe it might be real. For the next month I lived a double life. By day I was still COO of Waverly House, cleaning up store staffing disasters and negotiating freight issues. At night I was on calls with Caleb, a financial consultant named Monica, and eventually a small circle of potential backers who specialized in lower middle market acquisitions. I had exactly 2 things going for me. 1, I knew the business better than anyone alive, including my mother. 2, I had credibility with the people above her because they knew which of us dealt in reality. What I did not have was money. Not real acquisition money. I had savings, some investments, and equity from bonuses. Enough to show skin in the game, not enough to buy even a fraction of what we were talking about. So the plan evolved. We were not going to buy just Waverly House. We were going to acquire Ashford Retail Group itself through a consortium deal. Then break apart underperforming assets, refinance what made sense, and install new leadership where needed. It still sounds insane when I write it out. I was not going to do it alone. A family office out of Denver took interest after Monica pitched the turnaround potential. A small private investment partnership in Nashville liked that specialty retail could still work. With disciplined operations, Nathan never crossed any legal line. But he did make it clear what kind of strategic story would matter to the board. For months, I barely slept. I stopped dating because there was no space for another human being in my life. My apartment looked like a paper hurricane had hit it. I lost 12 pounds because I forgot to eat and then binged takeout at midnight. More than once I almost quit the whole thing because the scale of it made me feel like a child, playing dress up in an adult suit. And during all of that, my mother kept finding ways to humiliate me. She started excluding me from image-related strategy meetings because Lauren was better aligned with brand direction. Fine. Then she reassigned several operations functions to Chase under the theory that he needed executive exposure. That was not fine, because Chase had the attention span of a squirrel on cold brew and immediately started overriding store-level purchasing limits to impress vendors who flattered him. When I pushed back, my mother said, maybe if you acted like a leader instead of a hall monitor, people would listen more willingly. I asked whether losing money counted as visionary now. She told me I had a chip on my shoulder big enough to sink the company. There is a particular kind of pain that comes from being insulted by someone who depends on your labor. I cannot describe it well, but it changes you. My father remained useless. If I cornered him privately, he would sigh and say things like, "You know how your mother is," as if that were weather instead of choice. Once I told him he had spent 35 years mistaking avoidance for peacekeeping. He told me I was being unfair. Maybe I was, maybe not. Around January, word spread internally that my mother planned to announce a formal succession track. By summer, nobody told me directly, but I heard it from a district manager, who heard it from HR, who heard it from Lauren after too many martinis. The rumor was that Lauren would become president and Chase would get some executive vice president title created mostly to keep him from feeling left out. My mother still expected me to stay, of course. She saw me as permanent infrastructure. She genuinely thought I would keep carrying the place even if she handed power to my siblings. That was the level of contempt she had for me. She believed I would absorb any insult if it kept the business alive. At that point, the deal work intensified. The investor group wanted deeper diligence. They flew me to Dallas, then New York, then back to Denver. I used vacation time where I could, personal days where I could not. And more lies than I am proud of. Caleb assured me there was nothing improper about pursuing an outside transaction as long as I honored my duties and did not misuse confidential data. I clung to that because guilt still got to me sometimes. I know some people will say what I did was cold. Maybe it was. But I had spent my whole life being told that loyalty to family meant volunteering to be diminished. At some point, self-respect starts to look like betrayal to people who benefited from your silence. The actual opening came because Ashford was weaker than it looked. Interest rates were hitting their debt structure. Two unrelated retail holdings were dragging performance. And the board had become more receptive to strategic alternatives. Our group made an offer that was not flashy but credible. We had operating rationale, financing pathways, and a post-acquisition plan. There were weeks of back and forth, term sheets, calls at odd hours, lawyers muttering about indemnities and representations like they were casting spells. At one point I woke up at 3:20 in the morning convinced the whole thing was going to collapse because one lender got cold feet. Monica called me the next day and said, "Panic is not analysis. Sit down and drink water." I loved her a little in that moment. My family still had no idea. Then, in March, my mother hosted a Sunday dinner and announced to the family that she was finally ready to discuss the future of Waverly House. I almost laughed at the timing. She had us all in the formal dining room like we were in some bad prestige drama. My father at one end, my mother at the other, Lauren in a cream sweater pretending to be humble. Chase looking hungover, me already exhausted before the first course. My mother talked for 10 straight minutes about sacrifice and legacy. Then she said she needed to be honest that not all of her children were suited for ownership. Responsibility. She said a company could not be handed to someone simply because they kept the lights on. Then she looked at me and said, "Emma, you are valuable, but you do not have the temperament to lead what I built." I asked her what that even meant. She said, "It means you think small. You maintain. You do not create." Lauren chimed in and said maybe operations and leadership were just different skill sets and nobody should take that personally. That, more than anything, made me see red. Lauren had spent years gliding around in expensive boots calling table displays storytelling. She had never once stayed until midnight fixing an ERP failure. Never had to reassure panicked store staff that payroll would hit. Never been screamed at by a supplier because Chase forgot contract terms. But there she was, translating my humiliation into management language. I asked my mother if she had already decided Lauren would take over. She said, "I am leaning toward the child who understands brand and relationships, yes." Then she added, "You have always confused effort with entitlement." I cannot explain how quiet the room got after that. I stood up and said, "Then you should probably know I'm in the process of buying the company that owns yours." For 1 second nobody moved. Then Chase laughed because he thought I was joking. Lauren said, "What?" My father actually put his fork down midair. My mother stared at me like I had started speaking Russian. I should have kept my mouth shut. Legally, strategically, all of it. But after 34 years of swallowing things, that moment broke something open in me. She said, very slowly, "That is not funny." I said, "I'm not trying to be funny." Lauren asked if I was having some kind of breakdown. Chase said, "You can't be serious." My mother's face changed in a way I had never seen before. Not anger exactly. Fear, maybe. Or insult so deep it felt like fear. She said, "You do not have that kind of money." I said, "No, I don't. But I'm not doing it alone." Then she demanded names, details, asked what the hell I thought I was doing, who I had spoken to, whether I had used company information. It turned into a barrage. My father kept saying, "Diane, slow down." She ignored him. I told her my counsel had made sure everything was clean. That made her even angrier. That dinner ended with her calling me disloyal, unstable, vindictive, and pathetic. Lauren cried. Chase stormed out because he hates conflict he cannot charm his way through. My father followed me to the driveway and asked if it was true. When I said yes, he looked older than I had ever seen him. He asked why I had not told him. I said because he would have told her. He did not deny it. After that, all hell broke loose. My mother's lawyer sent a letter to mine by Tuesday. A lot of bluster, accusations, hints about fiduciary breaches. Threats of litigation if there had been misuse of proprietary information. Caleb called it what it was, which was intimidation mixed with panic. We responded. Nothing came of it because there was nothing real there. Inside Waverly House, my mother tried to freeze me out. She cut me from meetings, restricted access she had no right to restrict, and started telling senior staff I was pursuing outside opportunities. That backfired because people in the company were not stupid. Rumors spread so fast I could barely keep up. Some thought I was leaving to start a competitor. Some thought I was trying to force a sale. Some thought I had joined Ashford. One store manager texted me, "If you're taking over, blink twice." The weirdest part was that employees began quietly telling me they hoped it was true. Not because they all loved me. I am sure plenty thought I was intense or too demanding. But they trusted me more than the family circus above me. They had watched Lauren treat stores like photo backdrops and Chase burn cash chasing whatever made him feel important that week. They knew who solved problems. My mother got worse as the closing process advanced. She started calling relatives. My cousins texted me things like, "Aunt Diane says you're trying to steal her life's work." My uncle Robert left me a voicemail about loyalty and blood. Aunt Susan, to her credit, called and said, "I assume if Diane is this mad, you probably finally did something right." At one point Lauren came to my apartment unannounced. She brought wine like we were going to have some sisterly healing talk. Instead, she tried to convince me to back off for the good of the family. She said Mom was humiliated, people were talking, Chase was spiraling, Dad was stressed, and I was turning a private family disagreement into public destruction. I asked if she had ever once stood up for me when Mom undermined me. She said that was not fair because she had always respected how hard I worked. I asked if she respected me enough to refuse the role Mom was clearly preparing to hand her. She looked away. That was my answer. Then she said something that I will never forget. She said, "You always do this thing where you act like suffering is a personality." I told her to get out. The closing happened in May. Even now I still cannot believe I am typing that sentence. The investor group acquired Ashford Retail Group. Not just Waverly House, the whole parent structure. I became part of the new control group with a meaningful equity stake and an operating leadership role over portfolio transition. It was not just revenge. It was real. Contracts, board votes, financing documents, all of it real. And yes, that meant Waverly House, the company my mother still referred to as hers, now rolled up under an ownership structure I was part of. We did not do some dramatic movie reveal. There was a formal announcement, press language, internal memos, transition planning. My mother received the same official communications everyone else did, though of course she had been aware a transaction was pending. She just never believed I would actually get to the finish line. The first board meeting after closing is burned into my memory forever. My mother walked into that room in a navy suit like armor. Perfect hair, perfect lipstick. The posture of someone who believed performance could still control reality. Lauren was not there. Chase was not there. My father was not there. Just executives, board members, counsel, and me. She did not look at me until halfway through the meeting. When she finally did, it was with pure hatred. A transition consultant presented the portfolio review. Waverly House had operational strengths, brand recognition, and loyal regional customers. But its leadership concentration risk was high and governance needed reform. That was diplomatic language for Diane as a problem. When discussion turned to management restructuring, my mother cut in and said she assumed she would continue as CEO through the next phase because continuity mattered. Nobody responded immediately. Then the chair asked for my view, since I would be overseeing integration on the operating side. I had rehearsed this. I had prepared for weeks not to sound personal, emotional, or triumphant. I spoke about leadership stability, decision bottlenecks, missed digital opportunities, vendor concentration, and talent retention risk under current culture. I recommended appointing an interim president from outside the family and moving my mother into a non-operating founder emeritus advisory position during a 6-month transition. The room was silent after I finished. My mother said, "You arrogant little bitch." Just like that, in the boardroom. Not Emma, not my daughter. That. The chair told her to compose herself. She refused. She stood up, pointed at me, and said I had spent my whole life resenting her because I could never create anything of my own. She said I was parasitic, vindictive, and small. She said without her I would be nothing but a bitter manager counting someone else's money. I sat there and let her finish. Then I said, "Maybe. But I'm still the one in this room who got the deal done." I am not proud of how good that felt. She was removed that day. Not physically dragged out, nothing dramatic like that. But effectively done. Her title shifted, access change, authority gone. For the first week after that, I expected to feel victorious. Instead, I mostly felt tired. Bone deep, soul level tired. I had spent so many years imagining that if I just won once, really won, it would heal something old in me. It did not. It satisfied me, yes. I am not going to lie and pretend I took some saintly high road. There was satisfaction in seeing the woman who demeaned me realize I was not trapped beneath her anymore, but underneath that was grief. Because no matter how awful someone is, there is still something brutal about watching your mother look at you like you are the enemy. My father called 3 days later. He asked if we could meet. We went to a diner halfway between his house and my office because apparently trauma in my family pairs well with mediocre coffee. He said my mother had not stopped raging since the board meeting. That she said I had stolen from family, humiliated her publicly, and destroyed the future she envisioned. I asked him what future that was. The one where Lauren got a title, Chase got an allowance in executive language, and I spent the rest of my life fixing what they broke. He said he understood why I was angry. I told him anger had nothing to do with it anymore. Anger was months ago. This was consequence. Then he asked the question that told me everything I needed to know about him. He asked if there was any way I could give her something back, so she could save face. Not apologize to me. Not acknowledge what had been done. Save face. I laughed, and it was not kind. I told him I had spent half my life paying for the family's comfort with my labor and silence, and I was done subsidizing their image. He cried a little. I did not. That used to make me feel guilty. It does not anymore. Lauren did not speak to me for almost 2 months. Then she sent a long message saying she was sorry for some things but not for trying to keep peace. She said she had always felt trapped between me and mom, which I found interesting because I was apparently trapped beneath both of them and still expected to be gracious about it. Chase asked if I could help him land somewhere after it became clear his executive future at Waverly House had evaporated. I said no. He called me cold. I said he was free to discover capitalism like the rest of us. As for Waverly House itself, the company is still there. We restructured leadership, reduced debt inventory, renegotiated 2 terrible leases, rebuilt supplier terms, and finally launched a sane e-commerce strategy. Turns out the business had good bones once you removed the family ego from its throat. Employees seemed relieved more than anything. A few left because they were loyal to my mother personally. I understood that. Most stayed. Performance improved. Not magically, not overnight, but enough to prove the story my mother told about herself had always been inflated. She was not the sole thing keeping it alive. In many ways, she was the thing keeping it stuck. What I am struggling with now is not whether I did the wrong thing in business. Legally and strategically, I am comfortable. Morally, too, more than I expected. What I struggle with is the emotional fallout. Extended family split into camps. Holidays are a minefield. My mother tells people I betrayed her. Some believe it. Some quietly ask me for the real version. A few know enough of her history to understand this did not happen in a vacuum. The part one cannot say out loud to most people is that I do not regret it. I regret who my mother chose to be. I regret how long I begged, internally, for scraps of respect I should have demanded or stopped chasing years earlier. I regret that winning did not make me feel lighter. But I do not regret refusing to stay in the role she built for me. If I had simply quit, she would have called me weak. If I had stayed, she would have kept using me. If I had fought openly for succession, she would have humiliated me until I broke. The only move she respected was power, and for once I spoke her language better than she did. So that is what happened. My mother said I did not deserve the family business. She was right in one sense. I did not deserve the version she was offering, where I carried the weight and somebody else wore the crown. So I bought the company that owned hers and took the crown off the table. Story 5. My future mother-in-law called me, temporary, at our engagement party. So I quietly canceled everything. I'm still trying to process how my life changed in less than a week. Because if you had asked me 2 Saturdays ago how things were going, I would have told you I was the happiest I had ever been. I was engaged to a man I had loved for 4 years. We had just signed the lease on a townhouse outside Columbus. We had spent months planning an engagement party because our families lived in different parts of Ohio and western Pennsylvania, and this felt like the first time everyone would really be in the same room and act like one family. I had the dress, the venue, the cake, the little personalized cocktail napkins with our names on them, and a spreadsheet so detailed that my maid of honor joked I could probably launch a small nation with it. Now I'm sitting alone in the townhouse I was supposed to share with my fiancé. Surrounded by unopened serving platters and boxes of fake eucalyptus garlands. Wondering whether I ignored warning signs because I wanted love to be enough. My name is Emily, I'm 29, my ex-fiancé is Ryan, 32. His mother is Patricia, which I now say the way people say the name of a storm that wiped out their property. When I met Ryan, I thought Patricia was just one of those intense mothers who had a hard time letting go. He's her oldest. His younger sister Claire moved to Chicago years ago and learned how to keep Patricia at a safe, emotional distance, but Ryan stayed close to home. Not in a weird, lives in her basement kind of way. He had his own apartment, his own career, his own friends. He was functional, funny, attentive, and on paper, a complete adult. But Patricia still had a fingerprint on every part of his life. She had opinions about his haircut. She had opinions about his apartment furniture. She had opinions about which vitamins he should take, how often he should rotate his tires, and whether navy blue or charcoal gray made him look more executive. At first I rolled my eyes and laughed about it with him. He would shrug and say, "That's just mom," which at the time felt harmless enough. The first year we dated, Patricia was cool toward me in a way that was hard to call out because it always had plausible deniability. She'd say things like, "You're prettier in person than in photos," which sounds nice until you hear the pause before prettier. Or she'd compliment my cooking by saying, "Ryan usually likes simpler food, but this is surprisingly good." Or she'd introduce me to people as Emily, Ryan's current girlfriend, with a little smile like she was letting everyone in on a joke I wasn't supposed to notice. I noticed. Ryan noticed too, but he minimized it. He always said she didn't mean anything by it. He told me Patricia had a dry sense of humor. He told me she took time to warm up to people. He told me she got weirdly protective because his last serious relationship ended badly and she hated seeing him hurt. That ex was Monica, and I knew way more about Monica than I ever wanted to. Mostly because Patricia brought her up constantly. Monica did this. Monica loved that restaurant. Monica always sent handwritten thank you notes. Monica understood how important family was. Monica knew how to host. Monica never argued about holiday plans. Monica wore colors that looked soft. Monica, Monica, Monica. I asked Ryan once, maybe a year and a half into our relationship, if he realized his mother compared me to Monica all the time. He sighed like I had asked him to explain tax law on a roller coaster. Then he said, "She just thinks in references. Don't take it personally." That became his answer for everything. She just thinks in references. She's old school. She's not trying to be rude. She means well. It's easier if you let it roll off your back. And because I loved him, I tried. I tried when Patricia invited us to dinner and only set the table for 3 because she forgot I was coming, then spent the whole night making me feel guilty while insisting I take her salad. I tried when she called me at work to ask what brand of detergent Ryan used because she was worried the one at my apartment might irritate his skin. He was 30 years old and had never once mentioned having sensitive skin. I tried when she cornered me at Thanksgiving and said, "Women in this family are very strong. So if you're easily overwhelmed, it's better to know that now." I tried when she started asking Ryan if he was sure he wanted to settle down so quickly, which was fascinating because at family gatherings she also asked when we were finally getting engaged. Every conversation with her felt like stepping into one of those carnival funhouses where the floor looks flat until it drops out from under you. The thing is, Ryan was not some cartoon villain or spineless man-child in every area of his life. If he had been, I probably would have left much sooner. He was steady in so many other ways. When my dad had surgery, Ryan took 2 days off work and sat in the waiting room with my family for 11 hours without complaining once. When my car died during an ice storm, he drove across town with jumper cables and hot coffee. When I got promoted, he surprised me with dinner and a handwritten card that made me cry in the restaurant parking lot. He remembered how I liked my tea. He kissed my forehead when I was half asleep. He knew when to leave me alone and when to pull me close. That's what made the Patricia problem so hard. I wasn't dealing with an obviously terrible relationship. I was dealing with one giant unresolved fracture running through an otherwise beautiful wall. And I kept telling myself maybe it wouldn't spread. Then he proposed last fall. It was quiet, simple, and perfect. We were at Hocking Hills in a cabin we rented for the weekend. It had rained all afternoon, and by evening the trees looked dark and glossy under the porch lights. Ryan made pasta badly but enthusiastically. We played cards. We drank cheap red wine from coffee mugs because the cabin had exactly one intact stemless glass. And we both agreed that felt too fancy for us anyway. Later we went outside with blankets and stood on the little back deck listening to the water drip from the leaves. He got nervous before he got down on one knee. His voice shook. He told me I was his home. He told me life made more sense with me in it. He told me he wanted the boring days and the hard days and every Christmas and every random Tuesday with me. I said yes before he even fully asked. That night felt like the beginning of something solid. Something ours. Patricia called the next morning before we had even checked out. I remember because Ryan stepped away to answer, and when he came back he had that familiar tightness around his mouth. I asked what happened. He said, "Mom's just emotional. She wishes I had told her before I propose." I laughed because I genuinely thought he was joking. He was a grown man, not a prince needing royal approval. He wasn't joking. Apparently Patricia was hurt that she wasn't included in such a major family decision. Those were Ryan's exact words. Major family decision. As if our engagement was a merger and acquisition. I told him, carefully, that proposing marriage was supposed to involve the person being proposed to, not a committee. He agreed, mostly, but then he said maybe he should have given her a heads up because she liked to feel respected. That phrase stayed with me. She liked to feel respected. Interesting, considering how little of it she offered anyone else. Still, I was determined not to let her sour the engagement. I threw myself into planning. I'm good at planning because it gives me the illusion that if I organize every variable, life will behave. We weren't scheduling the wedding yet because we wanted time to save. But the engagement party mattered to both families. My mom Denise wanted something cheerful and relaxed. Ryan wanted both sides together. Patricia, naturally, wanted something tasteful that reflects the seriousness of the commitment, which sounded less like a party and more like we were announcing a hostile takeover. We found a private room at a local restaurant with a small patio and string lights. It was warm and intimate without being over the top. My brother Ethan helped me move centerpieces the morning of. My best friend and maid of honor Marcus. Yes, his name is Marcus, and yes, he has heard every single maid of honor joke in existence. Handled the playlist because he doesn't trust my taste in party music. Claire flew in from Chicago and texted me the night before saying, "If my mother says anything insane, blink twice and I'll spill wine on her." I should have taken that more seriously. The day itself started beautifully. Really beautifully. I got my hair done but kept it simple. I wore a cream dress that made me feel elegant without looking like I was trying to rehearse for the wedding. Denise cried when she saw me. Ethan pretended to gag and then hugged me too long. Marcus arrived with garment tape, Advil, safety pins, and a flask because he has the preparedness of a wartime nurse. Ryan looked handsome and nervous in that way I had always found endearing. He kissed me before guests arrived and said, "Today is going to be good." I believed him. Patricia arrived 40 minutes early. Of course she did. She came in with 2 giant floral arrangements I had not approved and a face like she was graciously stepping in to rescue an event from amateur management. She had on a pale blue suit, pearls, and that expression women like her perfect over decades. The one that says, "I'm being polite enough that no one can accuse me of anything. But everyone in this room should know I disapprove." She air kissed me and said, "Emily, sweetheart, you look lovely." This style is very forgiving. I just stared at her for a second. Then Marcus, who was beside me adjusting place cards, made a choking noise into his own shoulder. Patricia swept past us before I could answer. She immediately began redirecting staff, moving candles, and asking if anyone had checked the place settings for water spots. Ryan saw me watching her and gave me a helpless little smile that I now realize was his entire personality whenever his mother bulldozed a boundary. A helpless little smile and a request for patience. "Let her fuss for a minute," he murmured. "It'll settle her." Settle her. As if she were a nervous horse and not a 60-year-old woman insulting me at my own engagement party. Guests started coming in, and for a while things smoothed out. People laughed. Glasses clinked. The appetizers were good. My college roommate came. Ryan's cousins came. Denise and Patricia managed to stand near each other for almost 10 full minutes without one of them mysteriously disappearing. Claire gave me a look from across the room that said, "So far, no casualties." I wish I could say Patricia exploded in some dramatic, obvious way that would have made everything easy. I wish she had screamed or thrown a drink or announced that she hated me. That would have been simple. People understand open cruelty. What's harder to explain is the kind that unfolds slowly in layers, coated in charm, until you look up and realize everyone just watched you get skinned alive while smiling politely. First, Patricia made a point of telling at least 4 people that she had practically raised Ryan to appreciate quality, so naturally he always attracts women with ambition. Women, plural, in front of me. Then she told my aunt that marriage today was so unpredictable, and that young women understandably explore different identities before they really know who they are. I'm 29, I have a stable job, a graduate degree, and I have filed my own taxes since I was 19. But apparently to Patricia I was a vague social trend in heels. At one point, while we were posing for family photos, she stepped between me and Ryan to adjust his tie, though it did not need adjusting. The photographer awkwardly waited. Patricia patted Ryan's chest and said, "There, a mother notices these things before anyone else does." Then she turned to me and added, "You'll learn." That one made Claire snored so loudly the photographer had to pause. Even then, even with all that, I kept smiling. I hate that I kept smiling, but I did. Anyone who has dealt with a person like Patricia knows the trap. The second you react, you become the unstable one, the rude one, the difficult fiancé who can't take a joke, the outsider disrupting family harmony. So I smiled. I thanked people for coming. I touched up my lipstick in the bathroom and told myself the night would be over soon. I told myself I could complain later in private. I told myself not to hand Patricia a victory. Then came the toast. We had not planned an open mic situation. We specifically had not planned one because I knew family events could go off the rails. Ryan and I had agreed on 2 short toasts, one from Denise and one from Ryan's father, who is divorced from Patricia and lives in Dayton with his second wife. His name is George, and he is relevant mainly because he has mastered the art of looking mildly embarrassed from a distance. George gave his toast first. It was lovely, simple, warm, sincere. He said Ryan had always had a generous heart. He said I brought steadiness and joy into his son's life. He welcomed me to the family. Everyone clapped. Then Denise stood up and spoke about how proud she was of me and how happy she was that Ryan loved me well. She got misty, I got misty, half the room got misty. Then Patricia stood. Nobody had invited Patricia to stand. She just did. She tapped her champagne glass with a spoon and the room quieted because people assume a mother of the groom has permission to talk, or at least enough social authority that stopping her feels awkward. She began well enough. That's what still messes with me. She always began well enough. She said her son had always been special to her. She thanked everyone for coming. She praised the venue. She even complimented the food. Then she looked at Ryan for a long moment and said, "A mother spends her whole life protecting her child's future. And one of the hardest lessons is learning that sometimes you have to trust people you didn't choose yourself." There was this tiny shift in the room. One of those almost imperceptible collective inhales. Denise set down her glass. Marcus slowly turned his head toward me. Patricia smiled at me. Smiled. Then she said, "Of course, life has a way of sorting out what is lasting and what is temporary. And as women, we all understand that not every relationship is meant to become permanent just because it makes for a pretty party." I did not move. I honestly think for about 2 full seconds my brain refused to translate the sentence. There was nervous laughter from somewhere near Ryan's uncle. The kind people make when they think maybe they misheard something and want to escape the discomfort. Patricia kept going. She lifted her glass toward Ryan and said, "To my son, who I know will do what is right for his future, no matter how many distractions appear along the way." Then, unbelievably, she looked straight at me again and said, "And to Emily, who I'm sure understands that young love can feel so serious before real life begins. Temporary distraction, young love." At my engagement party, with my name on the cake, the whole room had gone still in that way that feels louder than shouting. I could hear silverware clink in another room. I could hear the refrigeration unit behind the bar kick on. I could hear my own pulse in my ears. I looked at Ryan. That was the moment, the actual moment when my future either held or broke. If Ryan had stood up right then and said, "Mom, that is unacceptable. Apologize to Emily or leave," I think this entire story would be different. We would still have had a huge problem, yes, but it would have been one we were facing together. Instead, he half laughed, not because he agreed, maybe not even because he found it funny. It was the laugh of a man who wanted discomfort to dissolve itself if he pretended it wasn't happening. Then he said, quietly but not quietly enough, "Mom, that was it. Mom, no correction, no defense, no boundary, no choosing me in the one moment I actually needed him to choose me." I felt something inside me go cold and very calm. People always imagine breakups as hot events. Crying, screaming, plates shattering, dramatic exits into thunder. But what I felt was cold. Clinical, like a switch had been flipped and suddenly the whole picture came into focus. I saw 4 years of excuses in one line. She didn't mean it. That's just Mom. Let it roll off your back. It'll settle her. I thought, very clearly, if I marry this man, This will be every holiday. Every pregnancy announcement, every birthday, every funeral, every house purchase. Every disagreement about children, every medical emergency, every choice. Every single thing in our lives will include Patricia pushing, cutting, evaluating, and humiliating. And Ryan asking me to survive it quietly so he doesn't have to disappoint her. I smiled. I have no idea where the smile came from, but it appeared. I took my champagne flute from the table, lifted it very slightly toward Patricia, and said, "Thank you for being honest." The room went even quieter. Patricia blinked, probably because she expected tears, anger, or scene-making. And I gave her none of those. Then I turned to the event coordinator, a woman named Selena who had been hovering near the doorway with the expression of someone ready to call security if required, and asked if there was somewhere private I could use for 5 minutes. She said yes immediately and led me to a small office near the kitchen. The second the door shut, she asked if I was okay. I said, "I'm actually not, but I need to make a few calls." She handed me tissues and said I could take all the time I needed. I didn't cry yet, not then. I sat down at a tiny laminate desk and opened my phone. First I called the florist for the wedding inquiry appointments we had already scheduled for next month. We hadn't booked a wedding date yet, but we had consults lined up, so I canceled them. Then I called the venue on our shortlist for next spring tours and canceled those too. Then the photographer consult. Then the bridal boutique follow-up. Not because those cancellations had to happen that second. Obviously they could have waited until morning. I know that, but I needed to do something concrete while I was still in shock. Something that turned my understanding into action before anyone could talk me out of it. Each call made it more real. "Hi, this is Emily Parker. I need to cancel our consultation." "Yes, tomorrow's bridal appointment too." "No, there won't be a reschedule." "I appreciate your time." My hands were steady the whole time. Then I texted Marcus. "Need you in private room now. Don't alert anyone." He was there in less than a minute. The second he came through the door, he looked at my face and said, "Oh no. You're done." Not a question. I nodded. He exhaled and shut the door behind him. "Tell me what you need." "That apartment application we started for wedding budget projections," I said. "Can you log into my email and make sure it's just me on anything new?" I can't think straight enough to remember what we already submitted. He took out his phone immediately. "Done. I'm canceling everything. Also done in spirit," he said. "Do you want me to get your mom?" I said yes, and he went to find Denise. Those 2 minutes alone before she came in were the first time I nearly cracked. Not because of Patricia, because of Ryan, because I knew the version of him I loved would come in apologetic and rattled and wanting to fix the feeling without fixing the cause, and I knew, somehow, that it would not be enough anymore. Denise came in with Ethan right behind her. I hadn't asked for Ethan, but once I saw him there I was glad. Denise took one look at me and started crying before I did. "What do you need, baby?" she asked. "I'm leaving him," I said. Her face changed, not shock exactly, more like a terrible confirmation. "Okay," she said. "Then we leave him." Ethan just nodded once, jaw tight. I told them what I had already canceled. Denise asked if I was sure, and I said I had never been more sure of anything in my life. She didn't argue. That's one of the things I will always be grateful for. She did not tell me to calm down, to sleep on it, to think about the investment, to preserve appearances. She trusted that I knew what humiliation feels like and what tolerance costs. Marcus came back and said Ryan was asking where I was. "Tell him I'll talk to him outside in 5 minutes," I said. Then I looked at my reflection in the dark computer monitor on the desk. My makeup was still intact. My hair was still perfect. I looked like a woman at the beginning of a beautiful night. Not a woman ending her engagement between a filing cabinet and a case of club soda. I almost laughed. We decided Denise and Ethan would start quietly gathering gifts and personal items. Marcus would settle the vendor gratuities I had prepared in envelopes because I refused to let the staff suffer through this mess unpaid. Then I stood up, smoothed my dress, and walked back into the party. The room shifted when people saw me. I think everyone expected a breakdown or at least visible tears. Instead I went straight to Ryan and said, "Can we talk outside?" Patricia was standing a few feet away, talking too brightly to one of Ryan's cousins like nothing had happened. Claire caught my eye from across the room and immediately started moving toward Patricia. Probably as a containment strategy. Ryan followed me onto the patio. The evening air was warm, and the string lights made everything look softer than it was. Through the glass doors I could see people pretending not to watch. Ryan started first. "Emily, I know my mom was out of line." "No," I said. "You know she insulted me on purpose." He rubbed both hands over his face. "I don't know why she said that." "Yes, you do. Can we not do this here?" Actually, this is the perfect place, because this is where it happened. He looked at me like he was trying to calculate the safest path through a minefield. She was emotional. She's been weird about the engagement. I should have shut it down faster. Faster would have required you to actually start. He flinched. Then he did exactly what I feared he would do. He reached for my hands and lowered his voice into that soothing register he used when he wanted me to de-escalate on his behalf. Emily, please don't let her ruin tonight for us. And there it was. Us, meaning him and me surviving his mother. Never him and me confronting her. Never him protecting us from her. Just me enduring, and him calling that partnership. I stepped back so he couldn't hold my hands. She didn't ruin tonight, I said. She exposed something. Expose what? That I'm alone in this relationship whenever it matters. That's not fair. It is fair. Ryan, she called me temporary in front of our families. And you said, Mom, like she had tracked mud into the house. He looked down. I was in shock. So was I, and somehow I still managed to understand what happened. He was quiet for a second. Then he said, what do you want me to do right now? That question would have meant something if it had come 4 years earlier. If he had asked it after Thanksgiving, after the Monica comparisons, after the detergent call, after every tiny cut that he sanded down into nothing. But hearing it now only made me tired. I wanted you to become a man I didn't have to instruct through basic loyalty, I said. That ship has sailed. His whole face changed then. He realized I was serious. Emily, he said, more sharply. Don't do something extreme because my mother is insane. I'm not leaving because your mother is insane. Then what are you saying? I'm leaving because you've had years to deal with her, and every time you chose comfort over me. He swore under his breath and paced 2 steps away, then back. So that's it. 4 years gone because of one awful toast. No. 4 years revealed by one awful toast. He stared at me. Inside, the doors opened and closed behind servers carrying trays. I could hear muffled conversation. A car alarm chirped in the parking lot. The world had the nerve to continue being normal. Ryan's voice got quieter. I love you. I know. Then don't do this. I'm already doing it. What does that even mean? It means I canceled everything. He blinked. What? All the consults, the tours, the appointments, everything we had in motion. You canceled our wedding stuff. Yes. Without asking me anything else. Without even pausing to think about what I must have been feeling to move that fast, he said. Emily, that is crazy. Crazy. I think that was the exact second whatever remained between us died for good. Patricia humiliates me publicly and I'm crazy for responding decisively. I almost thanked him for making it so easy. Instead I said, there it is. What? The part where your mother can say whatever she wants. But the minute I act like I have self-respect, I'm the problem. That's not what I meant. It is exactly what you meant. He started crying then, which I realize may make some people feel more sympathy for him than I do. But by that point his tears felt like another demand. Another way for me to pause my own pain and tend to his. I can fix this, he said. I'll talk to her. No. If you were going to fix it, it would already be fixed. I'll cut her off if that's what you need. Would you? Yes. Without resenting me. He didn't answer quickly enough. That silence told the truth. Because that is the thing people don't always understand about boundaries with parents. The boundary itself matters, but the deeper issue is whether your partner believes the boundary is necessary, justified, and theirs to hold. If they only do it under duress, you become the villain who pulled them away from family. Then every birthday, every holiday card, every illness, every guilt-soaked voicemail becomes a debt they silently pin to your chest. I wasn't going to live like that. I said, I don't want to marry someone who has to be dragged into defending me. He whispered my name like it hurt him. It hurt me too, more than I can explain. Because despite everything, I still loved him in that moment. Love does not evaporate just because clarity arrives. That's what makes leaving so brutal. You can know exactly what you need to do and still ache while doing it. Through the glass I saw Patricia turn toward us. Claire stepped into her path. God bless Claire forever for whatever she said, because Patricia stayed inside. Ryan asked if we could at least go home and talk privately. I said no. I told him I would come tomorrow with Ethan and Marcus to collect my things from his apartment and that he could keep the ring at his place because I wasn't dealing with it that night. Technically, he proposed with it, but I wanted nothing symbolic in my purse. He said we had already signed the townhouse lease together. I said we would figure it out legally and practically. But we were not discussing logistics until the engagement itself was over. Then, because I guess the universe wanted one last ugly little flourish, Patricia pushed through the patio doors. Claire was right behind her looking furious. Patricia came over with that same brittle concern people wear when they know they have detonated. something and want credit for asking whether anyone got dusty. She said, I think everyone is overreacting. Ryan shut his eyes. I laughed once, softly, because at that point what else was there to do? Patricia looked at me and said, Emily, if you're upset, I'm sorry your feelings were hurt. But surely you understand that families speak honestly. That fake apology almost did what the toast didn't. It almost made me lose my composure. Instead I said, you don't need to worry about how I understand your family anymore. Patricia frowned. What is that supposed to mean? It means the engagement is over. Claire actually whispered, holy hell. Ryan said my name again, warning this time, like I was embarrassing him. Patricia stared at him, then at me. And I watched the moment she realized I was not going to keep playing the role she assigned me. Temporary, accommodating, grateful to be considered. Her face hardened. You are making a theatrical decision over a misunderstanding. No, I said, I'm making a permanent decision because you told the truth out loud. Ryan snapped, Mom, stop. Again, stop. Not apologize. Not leave. Not you crossed a line. Just stop, like she was an annoying noise rather than the architect of this entire disaster. Patricia turned on him immediately. Don't raise your voice at me because she's unstable. And there it was. Unstable, temporary, distraction. All the words she had been dying to use. Finally out in the open because she thought she was untouchable. I looked at Ryan and said, if you do not understand now why I can't marry into this, you never will. Then I went inside, hugged Denise, thanked the staff, told a few close relatives the party was over. And left. I did not make a speech. I did not announce anything dramatic. Word spread on its own the way disaster always does. People can sense when a room has become radioactive. In the car, with Marcus driving and Ethan in the front seat and Denise beside me in the back. I finally cried hard enough that I could not breathe through it. Not pretty crying either. Full body, ugly, gasping grief. Denise held my hand so tightly it hurt. Marcus kept passing tissues backward without turning around. Ethan kept muttering things about wanting to drive back and have a little conversation with Ryan. Which in brother language meant felony. When we got to my mom's house, Claire had already texted me. Her message said, I'm so sorry. She's been trying to sabotage this for months. I should have warned you how bad she'd gotten. For what it's worth, you did the right thing. I believed Claire because she was the only person in that family who consistently seemed aware that Patricia was not merely eccentric. She was strategic. The next morning I woke up with my face swollen and my phone exploding. I had texts from people I hadn't spoken to in years because apparently nothing revives extended family communication like a broken engagement with public humiliation. Some messages were kind. Some were nosy disguised as kind. Some were from Patricia's side of the family insisting she didn't mean it like that, and that. Emotions were high. One of Ryan's aunts told me Patricia was from another generation, and I should show grace. I am so tired of grace being requested from the injured person. Ryan had called 12 times, left 4 voicemails, sent about 20 texts ranging from apology to bargaining to confusion to anger to apology again. The angriest one said, I can't believe you ended us without even trying to work through one bad night. One bad night. I almost responded just to ask whether he had suffered a head injury, but I didn't. Marcus read the texts and said, delete, block, hydrate. Wise man. Instead I went with Ethan and Marcus to Ryan's apartment. Ryan was there alone. Good. I had no interest in another performance from Patricia. He looked wrecked. Red eyes, same clothes as the night before. Hair flattened on one side like he had slept on a couch or the floor. For a second it gutted me, because despite everything, this was still the man I had pictured growing old with. Then he said, are you really doing this with an audience? And just like that, sympathy packed its bags. I'm doing this with witnesses, I said. He laughed bitterly. So now I'm dangerous. No, now I'm done being cornered into conversations where my reality gets revised in real time. Marcus murmured, damn, under his breath like he was watching courtroom television. We packed my things mostly in silence. Bathroom stuff, clothes, books, the ridiculous ceramic lemon bowl my aunt gave us for the future kitchen. While I folded sweaters, Ryan stood in the doorway and kept trying to restart the relationship through logistics. We can do counseling. My mom can apologize. I'll set boundaries. We've survived worse. That last one almost got me. Survived worse. What had we survived, exactly? Besides his mother treating me like a trial subscription while he watched and winced. Finally I said, Ryan, I am not interested in marrying potential. He looked like I slapped him. I'm interested in patterns, I continued. And your pattern is that my dignity is negotiable if protecting it costs you peace with your mother. He said, that's not true. I asked, then why didn't you stop her? He said nothing. I said, exactly. He sat down on the edge of the couch and put his head in his hands. I just thought if I kept both of you calm, eventually it would get easier. That, more than anything else, felt honest. More honest than the apologies. More honest than the promises. He had truly believed his job was to manage my reactions and his mother's moods rather than address her behavior. He had built an entire adult relationship on emotional traffic control and hoped marriage would somehow transform avoidance into strength. I almost pitied him. Almost. Before we left, I took off the engagement ring and set it on the kitchen counter. He stared at it for a long time. Then he asked the question I think he had been asking himself all night. So you never loved me enough to fight for us? I said, I loved you enough to notice I was the only one fighting for me. Then I walked out. That was 5 days ago. Since then, the practical side of disaster has kicked in. I've been talking with the landlord about the lease. Because we both signed, it's messy but manageable. Ryan offered to keep the townhouse and take over if approved. Which honestly is best because I can't stand the thought of building a life there now. I'm back at Denise's temporarily. Sleeping in my old bedroom under a framed poster from college she still hasn't taken down. Patricia has not apologized directly. Not really. She sent one email that said she regrets the unfortunate misinterpretation of a maternal sentiment. I laughed for a full minute when I read that. She writes like an HR department trying to deny liability. Then she added that ending a commitment over a celebratory misunderstanding suggests concerns that perhaps validate the very caution originally expressed. In other words, I proved her right by refusing to accept being treated badly. Classic. Claire forwarded me a screenshot of Patricia telling relatives that I panicked because I wasn't ready for marriage, which is a bold theory from a woman who literally toasted my impermanence while I was standing 6 feet away. George called to say he was sorry and that Patricia had always needed control. Denise wanted to call him back and ask why he ever had children with her. But instead she made lasagna and said no decent casserole was ever served without emotional support. At work I told people only that the engagement ended. I do not have the energy to explain the whole thing in polite office lighting. My manager, Olivia, thankfully did not pry. She just asked what flexibility I needed this week and quietly moved a presentation off my plate. The weirdest part is how quickly shame tries to attach itself to the wrong person. I keep catching myself feeling embarrassed, as though I failed some public test. As though Patricia exposed that I was unworthy. As though a broken engagement means I misjudged everything. Then I remember what actually happened. A grown woman humiliated me because she thought she could. A grown man failed to defend me because he had been trained not to upset her. And I left before that dynamic became my permanent address. That is not failure. That is expensive self-respect. Still, grief is weird. I don't miss Patricia. I don't miss being compared to Monica, who by the way is apparently married now and living in North Carolina. So congratulations to her for escaping the franchise. I don't miss the excuses. But I miss Ryan in all the private, ordinary ways that don't show up in breakup advice. I miss how he used to text me pictures of dogs he saw on lunch breaks. I miss that he knew exactly how to untangle my necklace clasps when I got impatient and started swearing. I miss watching bad home renovation shows with him and arguing about open shelving. I miss the version of our future that only existed if I agreed to keep swallowing myself. That's the hard part, not losing what was real, but losing what might have been if love alone changed people. It doesn't. It can invite them to change. It can reward change. It can survive change, but it cannot drag someone across the threshold of adulthood while his mother stands in the doorway, calling the shots. A few people have asked whether I would have stayed if Ryan had cut Patricia off immediately after the party. I've thought about that more than I probably should. And the answer is maybe for one night, but probably not for a life. Because emergency boundaries are not the same as internal conviction. I needed a partner who understood without coaching that public disrespect from family is a line, not a puzzle. Maybe some people think I moved too fast. Maybe I should have taken a week, demanded therapy, written out conditions, tried a separation, drafted a code of conduct for future holidays. But honestly, I have spent 4 years in the trial version of that life. The engagement party wasn't the beginning of the problem. It was merely the first time Patricia forgot to hide it and the first time Ryan forgot to pretend he would stop it. I have no desire to become one of those women who wakes up 15 years into marriage, exhausted and resentful, realizing she has spent half her life negotiating basic respect from her husband's family while being told she's too sensitive. I have seen that movie in real life. It usually stars a man who is otherwise wonderful, and a woman slowly disappearing behind the phrase "keep the peace." I will not keep peace that is built from my silence. So that's where I am now. Back in my childhood bedroom. Drinking coffee out of a mug Denise bought me that says, plot twist. Taking calls from vendors I'm grateful I canceled before deposits became bigger. Avoiding social media because I know there are probably pictures from the party floating around. With captions written before the implosion. Trying to remember that the humiliation belongs to the people who caused it, not the person who refused to absorb it. And if I'm being brutally honest, there is also a small fierce part of me that feels lighter than I expected. Not happier, not yet, but lighter, because for the first time in years, I am no longer trying to solve Patricia. I am no longer analyzing Ryan's tone for whether he might maybe finally stand up to her. I am no longer attending my own life like a negotiator at someone else's family summit. I'm just grieving, which is cleaner. Maybe one day Ryan will understand what he lost and why. Maybe he won't. Maybe he'll marry someone Patricia approves of, at least temporarily. Until that woman develops a human opinion and the cycle starts again. Maybe Patricia will tell herself forever that I was unstable, impulsive, disrespectful. Not a good fit for their family. She's right about one thing. I'm not a good fit for that family. Because I was never willing to become temporary in my own life.